Hey, Tom. And I got your message. I just haven't been able to sit down until about 3 minutes ago.
Okay, sure. It's fine. Just figure it's good to have a clean list and be able to check it if, somebody's trying to get in or
Oh yeah,
they're supposed to be
absolutely.
somewhere and they're not there, Okay, sounds good. I'm sure we'll have other folks just like yesterday pop in at some point here, but I'm just going to be multitasking a bit.
Oh, there it is. Yep. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room for sure.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot I was muted. I'll put this in Slack
Okay.
so that people
Okay.
can access it if they need.
Thanks.
Is Laura Winkle okay to admit?
Yes. Sorry, I was looking over the registration list. It's interesting.
No problem.
The people who have run there.
Yeah, so the meeting
Morning,
IDs are
Laura.
actually, hi Laura.
Away here. I thought you
What were you
both
saying
did a
about meeting
phenomenal job
IDs?
yesterday.
Oh, thank you, Laura. You did
Thank
well
you.
yourself.
Well, I don't know. I didn't do
Yeah.
much, but you've managed. You were like the person behind the curtain, and Tom, your moderating is always like spot on. So nice job.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, worked well. I'm glad that the breakouts, they could have gone better, but they definitely could have gone worse. So I was pleased with that.
Hey, they went.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think as the day went on, it got easier and easier, and we had fewer problems. So I'm hoping today, although I know we'll have people who will be brand new today who weren't there yesterday. So, a few hiccups, but I think, once you kind of learn how to do it, it's,
Yeah,
it's not
relatively intuitive.
hard. It's just something new that you haven't done before. So yeah, takes you a little bit. Yeah.
And I think given the news this morning saying something about some Verizon hiccup that was impacting internet connection across the entire Northeast, we didn't really have a horrible experience. And I'm assuming that many of us are in the Northeast. So we got lucky.
Yeah. And I'm a Verizon customer. I've got both FiOS for my internet in here, and then my phone is Verizon.
Yeah,
I do
me
keep
too.
an iPad with AT&T just,
Belt and suspenders always. You never know.
Right, there you go. You never know. Yeah. Okay.
And Tom,
Well,
I was going to
hopefully
say
everything will
before,
go.
oh yeah, technically there are two occurrences of the same meeting. So people that registered just for yesterday, for example, they could technically join using the same link and everything today. So
Okay.
yeah, even though there's two occurrences and they're asked to join one or the other, they can actually join both using just one link.
Okay. And then I saw you sent out the confirmations again this morning.
Yep. Yeah, I just because yesterday I wasn't sure. It seemed like some people couldn't find the confirmation email. And so I sent those much later.
Busy people. Right?
Yeah. So I just decided to make it a little bit easier, keep it fresh in the inbox.
Sure. Yeah. Excuse me, for whatever reason, of course, right as this thing is starting, my nose is starting to run. Excuse me.
No problem.
Are you in Washington, Mike?
Yeah. Well, technically right outside of it. We're in Rockville, if you're familiar with Maryland at all.
Yeah, not terribly, but is it calming down there at all, or?
Yeah, it seems to be. It was. We didn't go downtown really at all. Our offices are at 16th and L, and I think that was actually one of the perimeters, so you couldn't get past that street. So we would have been right on the edge, and technically the office would have been accessible. But our proximity to the White House and to Black Lives Matter Plaza, just like everyone after the 6th was just said, don't come in. So I was actually planning to go in this week, but my daughter's her daycare's water heater broke yesterday, and they're definitely closed today. Probably will be closed tomorrow. So I'll have to wait until next week before I survey the damage.
And here we thought 2020 ended.
Yeah. Yeah.
Silly us.
Yeah. Yeah. So my wife and I are juggling daycare here at home, but we had plenty of experience last year doing this. So it's just kind of jumping back into an old routine.
Yeah.
Hey,
Not
Kelly.
been fun.
Good morning.
How
I
about
just
you?
ta-
Are you? Sorry.
I was
Go
gonna
ahead,
say-
Kelly.
I was going to say, I caught the tail end of your conversation. This week, my daughter went back to school face to face, so we're excited to have a little quieter house.
Yeah. No, it's nice. It did a lot for our sanity, a lot for our production at work, and yeah, it was nice to be able to just focus.
Yeah. I can't complain. She did good. It wasn't a horrible, we were lucky enough that both my husband and I work from home and we can have some flexibility, but yes, it's good for her to be back in school too.
Mhm. How old is your daughter?
She's 11.
Oh yeah, so she was probably pretty excited, I'm guessing.
Yeah, she was missing her friends.
Yeah, our
It's
daughter's.
funny that's
Oh, go ahead.
one of the things that, as we've been doing all kinds of student surveys and stuff about, remote and new flex formats and whatever, the social element associated with the learning process, we all kind of took it for granted,
Mhm.
but recognizing the high impact of how much, we're social animals and how it really is impacting learning is kind of an interesting insight for, I think, many of our colleagues is on the faculty.
Yeah,
So,
that is interesting. And it's amazing what they can do. So, she was lucky enough that when we were doing the homeschooling, she was connecting via Zoom with her teachers. And then I found later in the afternoon, she was scheduling her own Zoom meetings with her friends to have conversations about things. They're like writing the script for this production they want to put on this summer. So it was kind of fun to see, them figure out how to stay connected. So,
yeah. Well, it definitely has stimulated a whole host of interesting creative responses, right? And solutions.
yes, it'll be interesting to see the problem solving skills they have.
So Kelly, yeah, great. Let's go ahead and have you try sharing your screen and make sure you can do that with the slide deck so that, nice,
Look good? Okay.
nice, looks good.
By the
Yeah.
time I don't test it, then it'll, not work. So I'm glad that
I know.
worked. So, yeah.
Very good. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I suppose we'll let Nicole in, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good idea.
Oh, that's Summer. Hi. Hey,
Oh,
Summer.
hello. I don't know why it says Nicole Spiro. It's so strange.
I don't know.
It's the first time I tried joining from, oh, maybe, you know what? Let me leave. I'll come right back. Because I think her calendar is copied to mine. I'll be right back.
Sure. Okay. And Ashima Singh can wait in the waiting room. She's not a presenter as far as I know. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Morning,
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 Michelle.
everybody.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Laura, how you doing?
Okay, how are you?
I'm okay.
Early for you, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Hey, we had snow yesterday for about a whole 3 hours. It's all gone, but
Well, we had snow. It's not all gone.
I have a lot of snow.
Mm. Mm. Kelly, where are you?
So I'm in Wisconsin. So actually not too far from Jeff. So
Oh.
it's kind of funny, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It's winter here though.
know,
I'm actually glad we have snow so we can do something.
I have a friend in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we had just he's my former college roommate. We've known each other forever, right? And so we're resuming on a social thing over the weekend with some friends. And as a result, I said, oh, there are these little champagne stoppers that are really cheap, but they're amazing, right? It's like the bottle is just like it's just been opened 2 days, 3 days later, right? So I said I should send him a couple of those. So yeah, I sent him a couple, and then I got a notice saying a delivery attempted. So next time I said, did you have anything arrive, yesterday or today at your door? And he goes, oh, 15 inches of snow.
No.
No.
Well, that explains it.
Yeah. So I think it could have been worse, right? In Wisconsin, you could have gotten a lot more.
Yes, we're getting like 3 to 6 inches at a time, which is very manageable. But
yeah, that's pretty.
It is pretty snow. It's nice to have. It just makes everything nice and clean and white again, and good for sledding and snowshoeing and stuff. So.
Well, it's unusual to get snow in Portland. Very unusual. So.
And that's where you are. Yeah, I was gonna say that's
Portland, Oregon. Yeah, we're like an hour from the beach, so.
It's nice when it happens, for a couple hours. It's kind of fun, and then it goes away.
Yeah, it was really pretty.
Yeah.
But it never stays. Hardly ever stays.
Michelle, you could host your own version of Let's Make a Deal. It's like behind door number 1 and door number 2 and door number 3 behind you.
Yeah, really good. I know. Yeah, you're the first one that said that in all these Zoom calls, Laura. How many doors does she have? What the heck's going on there?
I would be confused. I'd end up, in a closet.
I know. Well, this one, the first one's the laundry room, and then the one directly back is the bedroom. And then that downstairs is right there. So by the cat's in the window.
Oh, yeah.
She's up. She sits in the window every morning.
Hello. Want to say hello?
Nice place to be.
Yeah. Oh, and there's Laura's sweet little dog. She's not little though.
Hey. Yeah, he's not happy. We didn't go for our 4-mile walk this morning. Too much snow for me. He pulled me down on the ground.
How much is on the ground there, Laura?
Well, it's not that it's a lot, but it's slippery. It's probably about 2 inches, but it's kind of icy underneath. And, he just wants to go. So it just isn't, a good thing.
Yeah, no, that'd make me a little nervous too.
Yeah, we got that weird pattern of it was snow, then ice, then some snow.
Yeah.
So it just it wasn't a lot of anything, but it was just not great.
Yeah. Weren't you guys
on
the East?
I think I have to venture out.
Yeah. Weren't you guys on the East Coast supposed to get hit pretty hard though?
No, they make a big deal out of everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Storm
coming. End of the world.
Great way to sell groceries.
It's a marketing ploy. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, let me make sure my deck is ready to go today. It is.
Summer changed her hair color.
I did, yeah.
It looks good. That's something to do when you're trapped inside.
Yeah.
Help me do it. It's very grown in now, but I'm trying to blend it with like colored shampoos and stuff.
Yeah.
A work in progress.
Yeah. It's pretty color though.
Thank you.
Oh, the list is growing. Oh, there's Mike Riley. I guess we'll let him in too. All right. Otherwise, looking good. I think everybody else is just an attendee or, probably from a school, but that's okay. Even if they're doing a showcase session, I think they'll be.
Few people
Should be fine.
are session presenters. Casey and Jim McAtee.
Yeah, I got a few emails from folks that said they thought yesterday worked well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I would say I got a number of comments.
Yeah.
It was very nice.
Yeah, it really was.
A lot of people felt it went really well.
Yeah, I did too.
Morning, Mike.
Morning, Tom.
Hey, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Oops.
And I did find this when I was going yesterday. I might share it briefly before our first breakout session. It still doesn't seem clear that everyone sees this necessarily. And I've never seen actually the ask for help button. It's never actually sent me a message. So I'm not sure about that, but it seemed like this seemed to work for most people. So I might share this right before the first breakout.
You know, the box showed up. Am I on mute? I don't know. Let's see.
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. The box showed up sometimes, but not all times for me.
Right.
And the asking for help also seemed to be there when the box wasn't.
Okay.
Mike, make me a co-host, please.
Sure thing.
And make Summer a co-host, please.
Oh, you are a co-host right now. I'll make Summer a co-host also.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Here come our peoples.
Very good. Yeah, we had quite a crowd yesterday at certain points of the meeting. There were some pretty high numbers. I was watching the participant number as we went along.
Yeah, people, I think it worked well with the structure, but people kind of jumped in and out throughout the day. Also, I noticed we had people joining as late as 2 or 3 for certain things. And so, it worked well.
And I will say there were a few people who, did the high wire act of joining the meeting right before they were supposed to be presenting their showcase. And that didn't always work.
No, it did not.
So, yeah. Hopefully folks felt a little better about it today. Here's Sherry. I'm going to let her in too because she's on our panel this morning.
By my watch, we've hit 11. So if you want me to start admitting everybody, I can.
Please do. That's great. And I'm going to share my screen and get our slide deck up.
All right. Best of luck, everybody. I'll be here.
Break a leg.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We have a number of folks who are being let in from the waiting room, so we'll give this just a few seconds here, and then we'll get rolling back into day 2. Hope everyone had a good evening and that your technology is working smoothly today. That is always a risky endeavor. I'm here in the Northeast near New York City, and yesterday apparently someone cut a cable in Brooklyn that disabled most of the Verizon network across the Northeast. But thank heavens, didn't seem to impact too much of what we were trying to do with the showcase. So hopefully in your area, it will be very uneventful today. Okay, we'll let the rest of the folks be admitted as they start to flow in here from the waiting room. But good to have everyone back with us today. Welcome back to day 2 of our CLR Showcase. And I'm just going to do a few reminders here as we're going through about netiquette. As you enter in here today, of course, your mics are being muted automatically by the settings, but you can manipulate that. You can unmute, you can mute, you can turn video on, video off, etc. Through your own controls for Zoom on your computer. But just for the sake of everyone's comfort, please remain muted unless you're asked to unmute or unless you are presenting. That way, any ambient noise, dogs barking, Zoom school, whatever's happening in your world today, won't be distracting from the presentations and discussions that are happening as part of our meeting today. If you have questions, ideas, thoughts, we really encourage you to hop in the chat today. I think yesterday, by the end of the day, that really started to get very, very active. So we're hoping that we'll pick up right away this morning and people will post their questions and thoughts. And you can think of it as this multi-channel discussion that happens today. One is happening in front of you live on camera. The other is happening in the chat room. And so we'll have presenters chatting there, but we hope you engage there as well today. We had a solutions showcase yesterday at the end of the day. There was a lot of traffic there. We're really pleased to see that. So many people talking to potential solutions providers. But just a reminder that that was the appropriate place for marketing or solicitations of products or services. Any other forums for that are not appropriate during the discussions today or chat. So thank you very much for paying attention to that. Also today, our general session, this one that we're in today, the panels, those things where we're all in the main room together are being recorded. And we'll make those recordings and slide decks available to everyone after the meeting. But the breakout rooms cannot be recorded in Zoom, so therefore they are not recorded as part of this. Again, for those of you who may be just joining us today and weren't here yesterday, this is a rotating format. We'll have some general sessions, which are panel discussions, and we'll alternate those with our breakout rooms where you can actually go and talk with CLR practitioners who are here. That rotation will guide you through as we go along, but essentially we've got some mini sessions. So each of the showcases is 1 hour long, but it's made up of 3 20-minute rotating sessions where you rotate around between the different rooms, and the presenters who are presenting their CLRs stay in their rooms. That'll become more evident as we get there. So again, we'll give you some instruction on that. Today, those happen at 12 noon Eastern and at 2 p.m. Eastern today. Okay, here's our agenda. We're going to have our first panel starting here in just a few minutes. And then we'll have our showcase, which is the Group A schools at 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll come back from that at 1 p.m. and we'll have another panel session today on how these CLRs can meet the needs of students and employers for better information on learning and competencies. Then we'll have a break. And if you've not had a chance to do so and you are a CLR practitioner school, please make sure and visit the Gather Voices gallery. That's where you can provide some reflections on the CLR process you've been undergoing. It's kind of fun, it's really easy, and we're collecting a number of those as a repository of information about the project. We'll do another showcase today, our last one of the event, and that'll be our Group B schools again today. That happens at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then at 3 p.m., we'll have association leaders talking with us about where do we go from here and how do we take this work forward into the future after the 5 years that we've had here with the CLR phase 1 and 2. And then we'll just do some concluding remarks, some thank yous and things at the end of the day today. So that's our day. It's really, much the same as yesterday in format and feel, but of course the topics are going to be a bit different as we move through this. So given that, I'm going to ask that we let's go ahead and get our first panel started today. I think this is probably good timing. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule, but that's not a bad thing. We've got a number of panelists here, and I am so pleased that Kelly Hoyland from IMS Global is going to serve as our moderator. We actually had this group doing a panel for IMS Global in the fall, and it was such a great topic that we wanted to bring this back here because it's really, really relevant and appropriate to be talking about this today. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll ask our panelists to unmute, please. And I'll ask Kelly to go ahead and share her screen. and take over. Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited, as Tom said, to kind of do a repeat performance of this discussion. It was a really solid discussion in the fall, and I'm excited to share it with another group today. So as we look at CLR and we talk about it, one of the things that has kind of come up is how can that CLR really help to support our equity programs? You know, what are we doing to support diversity, equity, and inclusion on our institutions, and what role does CLR play in that? So I'm excited to have this panel here. So our panelists should be unmuted as well. We're going to share a little bit of background information with you and then move into kind of that panel discussion. So to start with, I think, Tom, you have a little bit of context for us.
Oh, thank you. You know, I just thought Tom Green, the Associate Executive Director at ACRO, the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. And, you know, this was such an interesting topic in thinking about student records as an equity tool or an equity barrier for that matter. But it really is so closely aligned with our equity focus as an organization. And I think the last year, certainly the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor brought such a focus and made us all rethink really more deeply what we were doing about equity and how all of our daily lives and our work impacted equity and were impacted by it. So at ACRO, you know, we're really strongly committed to this, and it's within our strategic framework, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's also in a lot of the actions that we take as an association. And so just to, you know, as examples of those, we have all had for many, many years caucuses at our association. I'm sure several associations do as well, which allow people from historically underrepresented communities in higher education to be able to gather, be able to share their own experiences, be able to connect with one another, feel supported. And certainly we saw last year, our Black Caucus was just super active, and we even participated in the March on Washington at the end of August as a group. We also we support peaceful demonstrations. That March on Washington was a really great example of that. We try and provide resources, and ACRO does have a resource page that provides a lot of information, links on history, links on resources people can educate themselves and educate others on racial injustice and American history, meaning the complete American history. We also do policy work on issues of inclusion on the national level, and that's one of the things that I think all good associations do, is try to have an impact on different issues nationally. And certainly our location in Washington, D.C. allows us access to be able to do that, but also requires action and strategy and impact. And then we also make sure that we represent the diversity of our members and of American society. When we do things like we try and find authors for publications or speakers at our conferences. And if you go to our conferences, you'll see that there's a real effort to make sure that the people who are up there in front of you and visible in these roles are a representative of the really diverse backgrounds that are represented in our profession. Would you go to the next one, please, Kelly? Thanks. We've embedded this also in what it means to be a competent professional. So as we think about the work of developing records and of using records in the field of admissions, we really want to make sure that our members see this as a fundamental competency, that diversity, equity, inclusion is not an add-on, it's at the root and core of what we do. And so we have a functional description of what that means with it. And then we also have an expert level of what we think is the attainment of that competency. And in that way, this really meshes right into, of course, a CLR and what that really means. And right now at ACRO, we're actually working on a badging platform for professional development so that we'll be able to, in digital fashion, just as a CLR, be able to allow our members to share their achievements and their competencies with others. So just wanted to provide a bit of an association context to this and why it's so important for ACRO as an association to be involved in the CLR work. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Tom. So from there, we're going to actually move to Dr. Baker to share a little bit about her perspective and things that we can be doing with assessment to help support this work. So Giannina?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share in chat a couple of resources. One is listed on your screen right now, but another I think perhaps adds to this conversation that we've been having for a while here at NALOA with equity and assessment. If you were here yesterday, we got a chance to talk a little bit about how NALOA has played a role in providing professional development and technical assistance to many of your institutions, talking just about assessment and getting people revved up for it. But we've also had a chance to really start to dig a bit deeper into what this relationship between equity and assessment looks like and why it's important. So again, one part that I quoted yesterday is without a focus on the assessment of student learning, the CLR simply doesn't work. Decisions on form, function, technology, and design all hinge upon assessment. And then if we really start to dig deeper, right, and we think about what a good CLR can do, it hopefully will explicitly describe learning experiences that can expose, integrate, and transform students, and in turn place equity front and center. And no longer are the curricula, co-curricular, and beyond hidden and only experienced by those who already knew about such experiences. If we really are wanting to ensure that our students are getting an equitable education, this is inherent in the work. We ask questions to many of you and continue to push on, how are you as an institution ensuring that you're not adding on additional requirements or burdens to students who may not be able to participate in certain activities? Or what are some equity implications that are considered in developing as well as accessing these experiences? Which students benefit the most from the CLR that's designed right now? And then thinking about, as you are aspiring to design it, what could students benefit from? These questions, I think, are very crucial as you think about these experiences, learning experiences that you want students to have. We know that our students come in that maybe have already been employed, maybe are full-time employees, perhaps have dependents that they provide for, or are really engaged in their communities. And so instead of us adding on these additional layers of burden to our students, how can we help include those different experiences that they bring in that might not be institution sponsored or campus specific or just institution driven on such a record? And so I hope that you'll take these resources. If you want to delve even more, I wish we had even more time to talk about what equity and assessment looks like. And we'll get to that in a few of the questions. And I'm sure the following presenters will get really institution specific about things that they've done. But I think that that occasional paper helps bring out what we see that relationship between equity and assessment look like, that really pushes on what Tom talked about, right? That power and that privilege that often our faculty and staff experience, and they're trying to bring students in, right, to facilitate that, not just be the bankers in that transactional experience. So that's just a tiny, tiny piece, but I'll be back.
A great teaser for the following questions later. So to give you a little more context, we're going to go to Xander next to share a little bit about Elon's program. So if you haven't attended their showcase, this is going to give you a little bit of background information and kind of tie in the story. So Xander.
Thanks, Kelly. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alexander Taylor. I am an assistant registrar here at Elon University. I won't get into sort of the elevator pitch because that'll be for the showcase later in the afternoon. But Elon University was one of the first institutions to have developed a comprehensive learner record based on our high impact practices. Also from Mike Sisson, I worked at ACRO as a research intern and employee for a little bit of time as well. And so I guess to start off, when we were first developing our comprehensive learner record, we were really addressing the data, how this information is captured in our information systems. We utilize our student information system for all of our experiences. And then eventually we got to a critical mass of experiences and data that we actually were able to mine this data. And Kelly, if you want to jump to the next screen. I guess to start off, the work externally from the institution and how this impacts equity and inclusion, that we need to address the impact that this has on employers, whether this does provide a difference maker for non-traditional students, students that have been disadvantaged from institutions and its impact. We've been surveying employers since 2015 on whether our visual transcript, our experiential transcript makes a difference in employment. And we've seen a lot of positive results from employers about how this provides, paints a different picture of the college experience, that it provides additional information. Of course, at the very bottom, that one saying that that it increases the chance of employment, that obviously it goes to show that employers are a little reluctant to immediately go all in on a new technology that we're not familiar with, and how these experiences relate to work productivity and everything like that, completely justified from the employer standpoint. But I think that it's just a small nugget right now that this information is valuable to employers, and we can provide the right information as institutions to represent the student's experience, the comprehensive experience in college. So next screen. And I guess kind of going off of that, with institutions can get to a level of granularity. I don't know if people have heard the word granularity. I use it pretty often, but we can provide employers very overarching views and overarching information on experiences if it's just as a validating mechanism that they have completed these experiences for an employer. But then we can also get in depth about the specific learning outcomes, the specific assessments that are tested and addressed in our experiences. And you can provide that information to an employer, and it's complete. If we have a document that allows the user of that document to get as service level or granular as they want to, then creating a document like that is extremely valuable. So this is just some of the information that if we were to provide more information, what are the things that employers would want, and there's good results coming from that. And lastly, on I want to touch a little bit about how the comprehensive learner record can help help institutions in achieving strategic goals in their strategic plans, their mission on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That we, as Elon, once we got a robust enough data set, that we were able to mine that information and see what students are participating in these experiences, what are the gaps that we might be running into. Elon, from an experiential learning standpoint, is pushing a lot on access, and how we're trying to shoot for 100% access in global experience. And so access is, of course, extremely important. And is there another screen? Yeah. And so I guess the last thing that I wanted to talk about, we talked about this in the first IMS Global Showcase, and I think that Janina brings up an extremely important point, that a lot of the problems that institutions run into about access is from a top-down standpoint, that institutions are telling students, this is what we count as learning, and you either fit the mold or we don't. We document or we don't. And that has caused a lot of the problems of access and things that students sometimes can't control for, that we can talk about engagement rates with internships with students, but if a student is working full-time, then they can't always participate in that internship. There are things outside of their control that the institution, this top-down approach doesn't work for everything. So we can mine the data, we can look at all the gaps, but the institutions also have a role in working with those students and targeting those specific demographics on how can we provide a better document and how can we provide better experiences for those students. I would be candid in saying that Elon has been many students and administrators at Elon have been wanting on-campus work to be included in our experiences, but because it doesn't fit the high impact practices that are provided by ACNU, that just by that one thing, the administration is still reluctant on providing the information. We've been pushing for many, many years, but I think that just goes to show that that the fight on providing more information and more experiences on the comprehensive learner record is an ongoing fight, and just goes to show that the top-down approach is really difficult to break sometimes. So.
All right, from here, we'll pivot a little bit to Sherry to share some of her contacts that they've done at UMBC in her new role as a consultant with the system.
Absolutely. So just to give background, my name is Sherry Braxton. I'm currently the Senior Director for Digital Innovation at Bowdoin College, 2 weeks in. Previously was Senior Director for Instructional Technology at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and now serving as a consultant. So our work with the Comprehensive Learner Record has focused on working collaboratively with higher ed institutions and industry partners to define credentials that identify skills that the employers have said they'd like to see students come to their companies with. The target audience here is non-technical students who are pursuing non-technical majors. And I'll get into this in a little bit, but what was happening is you've got all of these STEM majors, they come out of the institutions and you know, based by degree, they can be employed with these companies. We're talking about the Northrop Grumman, the General Dynamics, those companies that you'd find in the Baltimore, DC, Richmond corridor. What they really want to do is open up that pipeline to students who are humanities majors, you know, non-technical majors, so that they can come in with the skills that they need to hit the ground running that are related to data fluency, manipulating data, and those types of technical skills. So next slide. So this Greater Washington Partnership, as I mentioned, is the Civic Alliance of CEOs from the Baltimore to Richmond corridor. And they've formed this Capital Co-Lab, which is a collaboration between 12 higher ed institutions, which include the System of Maryland Schools, University of Maryland, Baltimore County specifically, the George Washington University, lots of other schools in the area, and companies like Under Armour, Amazon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. So they've come together and identified some of the skills that they'd like for these students to come to these companies with. Next slide. So there are 6 competency areas under what we're calling the Digital Generalist, which is focusing on these non-technical majors, from data and analytics through data manipulation, data ethics, data security. Now the goal here is not to make them, you know, subject matter experts on these topics, but to give them the foundation they need to be able to work within these companies. So next slide. As we looked at the skills that the employers identified, a learning framework was developed, and we call those the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to perform as a digital generalist. And these are pretty lower level in Bloom's taxonomy, right? It's just to make sure students have an understanding, can do some simple data manipulation, can work within those companies effectively. And so next slide. So what we did so that students wouldn't have to change their majors is to develop some modules to capture these KSAs so that students could demonstrate these abilities. And so we worked with our faculty to map our curriculum against the knowledge, skills, and abilities that were identified, and created these standalone modules that these students could do outside of their courses. So rather than taking a course in data science that would be a 16-week course, they can now go in and be focused on these specific areas of expertise that the CoLab has identified. So next slide. And in order for it to even be more accessible to students, we made those individual competency areas individual badges. So imagine that I've already had a prob stats course. I can demonstrate the KSAs around prob stats through that coursework, but I need to do the other 5. I can then take the time over a couple of semesters, go through these modules, review the content, take the assessments, and demonstrate that I have competency in those areas. And so in order to implement our CLR, we've used APHIS, and it has 8 tools in its tool suite, but the 3 that we needed were curriculum mapping, the outcomes assessment and evidence collection, and the outcomes transcript, which allows us to implement the CLR. So next slide. And essentially what we've done is we've built out our USM X modules, those edX modules, as co-curricular competency-based courses in edX, along with mapping our courses in our general curriculum that will allow students to also acquire the skills and earn those stackable credentials. So next slide. So the importance of this work and being able to demonstrate a lot of this goes down to, the fact that you have to be able to map the learning outcomes. And not only did we want to focus on at UMBC our curricular courses, which follow our functional competencies, but co-curricular activities that students are participating in. So part of our strategy is to capture all of the learning that's happening at the institution, so all students can demonstrate where they're acquiring these different skills. And so next slide. In addition to that, we've been working with the System of Maryland has a badging initiative since 2015 that looks at 21st century skills, because that's another area that employers had identified that when students come for interviews, they're not able to articulate these basic skills. So we're working with faculty and our co-curricular areas to identify where these skills are being attained as well. And in addition to that, we have our employment opportunities and other activities that are happening on campus. Our McNair Scholars Program, students are acquiring these very different skills, student workers in their different areas, and things like financial literacy. We've got a course that helps students gain some mastery of skills on financial literacy. So we have a broad spectrum of different competencies that we're capturing in our CLR to give students, all students, the ability to demonstrate where they're getting these skills across campus. And as I mentioned, if you come to the presentation this afternoon, we're building out the pilot of the CLR using the Greater Washington Partnership work.
Great, thanks for having some context for our conversation. So as we've learned more about your projects, how is this process really increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion? So what is it meaning for your campus?
Well, I'll go first. I think a CLR it gives transparency for all those types of activities and learning activities that students are engaging in. And so that ability for students to not only be able to identify where they've got competency, but what areas am I lacking competency, and what activities might I participate in order to, attain those skills that I feel like I'd like to have in my portfolio. So just the transparency and ability to have more insight into where activities are providing these different opportunities for learning is important in helping.
I think this is Janina. When I think about this question, and I saw Alexander's one of his slides talked about revolutionizing, and I do think that the CLR potentially has the potential to revolutionize higher ed as we currently see it. As I think about how the CLR process could increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm reminded of the saying that diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice or a practice, and equity is a goal. And I often think that with the CLR, actually going through that process and the input being the CLR, potentially you are getting to equity. And that's a huge piece. And I think as institutions, especially K-12 and even higher ed, work to this anti-racist educational system, right, where we are uncovering some of this hidden curriculum. I also think that within this space, the CLR allows institutions to be a bit more intentional about the learning experiences that their students are getting. So very dependent on their context at their institution. It's not necessarily based on all institutions. It's there, and they get a chance to really think about what's transformative for their students. We talk a little bit about that standards without standardization piece, right? So by institutional type, we are seeing right now that there's not one right way to do a CLR, that there are many ways to get to that input, again, dependent on your students and your context. And then even thinking about how a couple of people yesterday even talked about encouraging student input. Students definitely can talk about where they're learning and where those learning experiences that might not necessarily be a HIP, a high impact practice, right? For some of our students, maybe there's some other ones that we need to think about including, and also then communicating that back to students. So this allows for a feedback process that maybe doesn't exist at some institutions. And then one last piece that I'd add is that this work takes time, much like any equity work that we jump into, right? So if we're really truly working to not only have equitable access, but thinking about retention and the outcomes that result from that, mapping outcomes and validating evidence is not something that will come overnight. And so definitely the processes mirror each other. And again, if we're really truly working on behalf of students, this could be quite a process that does help revolutionize our higher education system.
Yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to add that I think as institutions start seeing who's participating and earning these different competencies and having a CLR that's pretty robust compared to others who may not be participating, it may inform programming at the institution and the types of opportunities that students are being given. And during our panel, IMS panel, one of the things we talked about was the importance of having a diverse leadership and people at the institutions who are doing the planning of these programs so they can, create experiences that are attractive to those who may not be participating otherwise. There's a saying, you have to be able to see and do things that you're familiar with, that you see it to be it, a lot of people say. So we need to be able to have opportunities that students feel comfortable participating in that allow them to then expand their abilities through a CLR.
Yeah, I'm going to add just a little bit on, I think, about how the data that we're collecting and using has the potential to do this. Whether we choose to or not, right? That's a different, right? That's the intent part of it. And I really like, Jeannie, what you said. I want to frame that somewhere about DEI and the, what those things really are. But I think I almost want to think about from a 360 lens, that if we think about what we're doing today and building upon what Sherry said, if we have information that shows where our students are engaging and where they're not engaging and who's engaging, who's not engaging, a lot of us have developed programming that's supposed to, right, add to the experiences of our students. But are our students engaging in them equally or unequally? And did we develop programs that were intended for engagement that are being engaged in by students that we didn't build them for? And I think we've seen evidence of that. And I'm not going to call out this in a negative way at all, but I was just so struck by the data dashboard, one of the early ones we saw from South Carolina in Beyond the Classroom Matters, that had this rich set of data showing all of these engagement opportunities across the institution that were just it lit up light bulbs in my head, right? Then I think of the way that I hope someday, right, in the future, that these data will be mined by things like a student putting their CLR in LinkedIn, and it allows something to be mined that way. And then employers will then look for people with talent, which is distributed equally, right? But opportunity is not. I think that comes from Southern New Hampshire, actually, not for me. But can we get more equity in the people who are achieving credentials in the hiring practices by unearthing the data and the information on what they can do and what they've learned, not where they went or their name, those kind of hiring bias type of things that occur all the time. And then even like the third leg of the stool, do we see the potential in the future that K through 12 will be offering us this type of information? Will it allow us to be looking for students who enter our institutions with more information than we've had in the past? And I think this last year in the pandemic, when we've seen almost the elimination of test scores because they weren't available, and schools started to look for other ways to search for students, the risk is that, of course, those new ways they search for students might be less equitable than actually the testing programs they were using. So, I think the CLR has a lot of potential to be able to really inform a lot of our practice. And I kind of think this 360 direction of looking and using that data for equity.
You did a great segue into the next one. So how is our CLR supporting that transition to employment? Really helping bridge the gap and making sure that learners are being hired based on what they know and not who they are. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the work that you've heard Alexander talk about and what we're doing at the System of Maryland, there's been a huge relationship between the institutions and employers to help with that transition, to make sure students are not only being prepared in their discipline areas, but with these soft skills that they need to be successful. If a student can't sit down and articulate, how they've collaborated, how they've been leaders, how they've been able to do some critical thinking, those are fundamental skills that translate, so that while they have their domain specific knowledge, they also need these underlying skills. And the CLR can really help to disaggregate all of those activities that happen in a class to identify and pinpoint some of these areas of focus.
Xander, did you have some stories to share or thoughts?
Yeah, it just came right out of my brain. I was just trying to collect it.
Okay.
So I'm sure that people heard a lot from yesterday, but the comprehensive learner record it's interesting because it intersects with so many different aspects of our lives. We're trying to address students being able to use this as a document for their own reflecting, for their own understanding of their learning and what they have attained, where they can pursue and be successful. At the same time, we're also trying to bring in employers, trying to make this a document that's useful to them. And those serve two very different purposes. The designs may be completely different, and the implementations might vary, but the comprehensive learner record is intended to be, or in my opinion, intended to be a reflecting tool for students to be able to understand that their learning is not just whatever their major is. And especially as we continue to talk about lifelong learning moving forward into the coming decades, that a student doesn't just, and this coming from a residential campus here at Elon, a private school, that we have 22-year-olds that think, I'm a marketing major, that's the only thing that I know. But those competencies overlap with so many different elements, and people can be moving into so many different areas, but that's where the institutions, both from an academic and student affairs, can support the student in reflecting and understanding what they're learning.
And Kelly, I think even flipping this, I think we need to think about how CLR can support the transition back into education. We have a lot of people who've been working and they decide they want to get a degree or, change their focus. And that prior learning from their employment experiences can really help them to get a leg up on starting on a new degree. So I think it's that two-way exchange that we really need to focus on. It can help in both of those transitions.
And I would add, Janina here again, that if we think about, again, assessment in relation to the CLR, it's not just the transition to employment, but it's also getting faculty engaged in this mapping work so that they even better understand the learning outcomes, not only for their course and how it connects to the program, that connects to the institution, but they can start to explain that to students. So as students prepare for future graduate work or employment, they can then start better explaining that to employers. Because I think that people have mentioned this several times before, that we see that people are self-selecting out of potential experiences because they don't know that they can do these things. So the more that our faculty can reinforce, what students are getting in those courses and those in staff with their learning experiences, goodness gracious, they're better prepared for that next step. And then I also think that, and Brenda, you brought up a point in the chat box, that we then hopefully are better able to tell employers what these learning experiences are. So many of you have developed catalogs of experiences, and now that's related to employers so they can understand a little bit about what students were getting in those. So I think that the more that, again, we do that work before, that assessment work, the better off and the more supported our students, faculty, and even employers feel about that transition.
Yeah, I'm going to be just a little bit heretical here and talk about the students who don't finish. Of course we want our students to gain a credential, right? A high quality credential. And, that's a hugely important thing. But we also know that about half of the people who start higher education don't complete a degree. And I think up to this point, we've functioned in a bit of a 1-0 binary equation of you either have the credential or you don't, right? If you started college and didn't finish, you're a dropout, right? Well, we know that people are acquiring skills and achieving things all along the way, even in one semester of attending college. And I think the CLR allows us to provide people with some kind of record of something that they can demonstrate they have done rather than something they haven't finished. And I think that can also be helpful for people. And I suppose too, even along the journey of higher education, people will switch jobs, get jobs. Can these records help facilitate that even while they're continuing to work towards a credential in the long term?
So Mark in the chat had posted a question. For those institutions that do not mandate participation in activities that contribute to this non-curricular record, how do we avoid the negative connotation associated with those students who didn't have one to share? It might be an access issue, but how are you overcoming that? Or thinking about it if you're not overcoming it yet?
I'm gonna add one thing, but I'm gonna prepare Xander here. I'm gonna call him out here to talk about the work they did early on at Elon with the resizing, the visual resizing. So just prepping you for that, Xander. I'm gonna toss the ball to you in a minute. When we were early on in this work, I mentioned yesterday we had been able to consult with people in the UK because they had the higher education achievement record and had it for a long time before we even thought about starting this. And there were some really good lessons learned there about it. And we were able to go to Kingston University outside London, which serves a lot of their former polytechnic. So they attracted a lot of first generation students of color, adults. They had this population that typically we're addressing here. We're concerned about the inequity of their participation. And they had been really thoughtful about this in a way that and this was spurred by the London Olympics. And so they created bronze, silver, gold awards for meeting certain, achievement levels. And what they did was they created alternate streams so that you could earn the award, bronze, silver, or gold, but you didn't have to be a traditional student participating in things that happened on campus in order to do that. If you were a working adult, there were alternate streams to be able to help you achieve those things. And I think just really being thoughtful about that and recognizing that this has to work for all of your students, not just those that are going to be on campus participating in student life activities, is an important lens to think about as people are developing their CLRs and what they want to include in those. All right, so given that, I'm going to toss it over to Xander.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That is a great question, because as Elon's done a lot of marketing with our students. I think that one of the strengths that we've had coming out of the last 5 years is that we've gotten a lot of great information out to students, marketing, and we have put a lot of attention on advising the student from right when they matriculate, being sure that they understand not only just the curricular side, but just the understanding the greater participation, and encouraging students. It's a great question because even as we see graduating seniors coming through our office, that this was Elon specific, but we used to have all seniors come into the office for a graduation appointment that we would run through the degree audit, ensure that they're set and they're ready to graduate by the time May commencement came around. And that was a perfect time for us to be marketing visual transcript, what resources we had after the student graduates, that Elon is still here to help you out even after you graduate. And it was difficult because sometimes you would have students that didn't have very much on the transcript. And so the design of the actual transcript is very important. You don't want to be you want to make it useful for the student to showcase their information, provide enough detail. But if they only have one or two experiences, and having a lot of white space on a document or anything can be sort of off-putting for both the student or an employer or a third party that's utilizing that. So I don't know if I have an answer to the connotation question, but I guess that's sort of some insight from the institutional level.
And there are options. I know in the chat there was some conversation about allowing students to self-report. So that might allow them to, share some of their experiences that happen outside of institution-sponsored things. If they're in a community involvement or things like that. So that might help as well. But other questions for the panel or thoughts that you want to share? Since we started a few minutes early, we might wrap up. So we've got time for questions.
Yeah, and please continue to put things in the chat if you have any questions for the panel. We've got some great comments and a lot of, I think, +1s happening there, echoing a lot of the comments from the panel. I think that these questions are really being thoughtful, right, about this work and really considering the implications, because I do know that a lot of institutions get excited about this work based upon the way they can see it reflecting things that are happening outside the classroom. And so that's a really, that is great, but that may also then reveal, right, some inequitable areas for students who are caring for other kids in their family. Students who have to work 2-3 jobs in order to get through school. What are you going to use as a way to help them? Reflect something in this that's really as meaningful to their progress in this as someone else. And it's not to say that all of our students who come from low SES backgrounds don't participate. That's not true. We have lots of students who participate. It's just they often do it in the midst of even greater challenges with transportation or access to those things. That said, okay, I see that we've got a question in here from, to be partners in undergraduate admissions, from Mike Flanagan at Master. Yeah, so that's a great question. So how do we get admissions people to be thinking about K-12 and bringing in CLRs from that space? I don't know if any of our panelists have thoughts on that, but certainly we can even open that up to if people want to respond in the chat with that. So I'll ask any of the panelists if they have thoughts on that first.
Well, our undergraduate admissions enrollment management has been involved in some of our other.
Sherry's going to leave us in suspense.
Oh, that's a cliffhanger, Sherry. We lost you there for a second. Yeah.
The internet strikes back.
Yeah, that's right. So while Sherry's unfreezing, I want to go to Brenda Selman's comment in here. The CLR is institutional validation, right? Self-reporting versus institutional validation. That's a great one. Boy, did that come up, especially in phase 1, as we were really thinking about what to include in those very early discussions around 2016, 2017. But Brandman University, if you've not seen theirs, they did a really nice job of clearly having these categories of, these are things that the student took from us, and they are part of this because they took coursework from us. These are things that we supervised as an institution. It was learning that happened outside the classroom, but we validated that, we vetted that. Whether it was our supervised or the students submitted it, someone's looked at it and assessed that work. And then they have this third category, which is really cool, which is student self-reported work that they're saying, we're not validating this stuff, but we're posting it here because it's relevant to what the student's doing. And I remember, and Lori Dodge may even be on here and able to post in the chat, that one of the things they had was like a nursing student who had earned a nursing achievement at work. And so she wanted to post that in on her CLR as part of that, completely relevant to her degree program and to her record, but not something that Brandman is going to assess and say, you know, did she really earn that nursing award at work? You know, is that something we'll validate? But it seemed to fit, you know, nicely within that as an example for it. Right.
Tom, I made it back, I think.
We see you, Sherry. Great.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I was just gonna, you know, I gave you the cliffhanger and then I froze. So I was just gonna say, you know, our enrollment management folks have been involved in some of the other credentialing efforts, co-curricular credentialing efforts. And so they have an awareness of what the value is of these programs. And I think that that's how you get them involved. You have to, you know, they have to understand what the purpose is and why it's important. And as they do that outreach to K-12, to see where other, you know, where those schools are and thinking about that. But first, making them knowledgeable about what the CLR is and what the benefits are for both K-12 and higher ed.
And I would just add from the IMS perspective, we have K-12 members as well. And there are some districts who have started to issue CLRs to their students, various different reasons, you know, whether it's from the CTE side, you know, and the career and tech side, or from kind of that personalized learning. So they're coming for higher ed. So think about that and have those conversations on your campus are important. So.
Mike Riley had a good question there, which is really an equity question about less resourced institutions that are, you know, how do we help them develop CLRs? And I think, you know, a couple of things hit me right away when I hear that. One is, of course, that, you know, get into a collaborative, right? Find other people who are doing this work and draw upon those resources. It's daunting when institutions think of starting doing a CLR project, as everyone who's a participant in one of our phases here knows. It's a lot of work to do that, and some can sometimes overwhelm. And I think it's very supportive to find other people who've done it, but also you can learn from their resources and learn from that. Then the other part of it that I think of are, I think that there are many companies out there who are really trying to make this as turnkey as possible. And oftentimes the process of doing this work, especially since it's also new out there, isn't turnkey. But I think the more we develop this and the further it goes along and the more that companies work to help people get more of a turnkey solution, I think that's going to really help under-resourced institutions, especially those. I think of community colleges with few IT resources trying to do this work on their own. I think that can be a barrier as well. So thought there. Other thoughts?
I would echo what you said. I think that some of this, much like when we talk with faculty about their assignments, you know, institutions are also like, oh, I don't think I want everyone to know what our students are necessarily getting. So there is a bit of that competitiveness advantage that you want to have of your institution. However, I think that with many of the institutions that have been involved in the CLR project for a while have been very open in trying to work with other institutions that are interested in that. Obviously, it's because it's for the benefit of our students. So I think that this is definitely a step in showing how we can collaborate and work together and learn from each other. And even more so, I think, help us understand what our institution's niche even more, you know, what we can offer to our students, what they know and can do as a result of our education within ourselves, but if you wanted, even with others. So I think that that's a huge piece. And I also add, someone asked earlier, you know, how do your partners in undergraduate education to partner with this? This work is happening. It might not be the CLR itself, but assessment and mapping and validating evidence is happening right now as we speak. So partnering up with them and figuring out, you know, and maybe potentially helping ease some of this work, I think would be a really good way to start that, but it's happening in many places.
There's been a lot in the chat too on K-12 there that seems to be a really robust area for discussion, and probably something as we think about where this goes in the future to think about that as well as an interface there. So thank you very much. I just want to thank our panelists and Xander, Giannina, Sherry, thank you for being, and Kelly, thank you for moderating today, putting this together. Great job in organizing. So I'm going to go back and share my screen because we want to get ready for our next showcase. And so I think we all learned a little bit yesterday as we went through. If you were here yesterday, I think you've become a Zoom expert now on how to navigate between breakout rooms. But just a quick reminder, and then I'm going to ask Mike Sisson from Acro to pop on here and give us a little tutorial about what to do. There are 3 20-minute sessions within the next hour. The institution stays in their room and the audience moves between breakout rooms to be able to talk with and see different CLRs. So with that, I will just say that we're going to do this between 12 and 1, and at 1 o'clock, you'll just be swept back in to this room, to the main room, and we'll go to our next panel at that time. So Mike, would you like to take it over, please?
Yeah, sure. So experiment went pretty well yesterday. Hopefully it goes slightly better today. I'll open up the breakout rooms, institutional presenters, just find your institution, hop in there, and then you'll stay in there the whole time, as Tom said. For everyone else, I'll be sending messages to each breakout room when the 10 minutes remain and then when 20 minutes expires. And at that point, you can just switch and self-select a new breakout room. If you have any trouble, feel free to shout out something in the chat or just over live voice comms. You can also just rename yourself by right-clicking your portrait and make your name the name of the room that you want to go into. So hopefully people don't have troubles, but I'm here to help if that happens. So open the rooms up now. And if you don't see the breakout or the option of joining one, then feel free to start renaming yourself and we'll get started manually assigning you.
This is Sherry. Can you move me to my room again, please?
Sure. Jerry?
Sherry Braxton.
Sherry, sure.
Yeah, thanks.
And that's UMBC, right?
Yeah, University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Sure.
Thanks.
This is Paul M. Could you move me to Mine's room? Thanks.
Sure. Mine.
Mike, are you there?
Yep. Yeah. I was just. I'm just staring at the participant list for changes in names. Where would
Okay.
you like to go, Michelle?
Well, I'm fine, but was UC San Diego going to be here today? Do we know?
Is no one in there?
No, not yet. I know it's early, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. But I didn't. When I was scrolling this morning in the session, I didn't see them. So.
Is it Jennifer?
Tom's on.
Yeah, is it Jen? Yes, there was somebody there yesterday.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, there were two. They had two presenters.
Yeah.
I'll go back in a minute here, but I didn't see them this morning already, so I was a little concerned.
Okay. Let
Okay.
me.
Thank you for
let me
the heads
check-
up.
Let me check the registration list and see if I can remember who it was that was here registered from.
I know their name is right on the top. I should have wrote it down.
And for anybody else that needs to hop into a session, just let me know. Oh, Sherry, you're still not in there? Is there an option to join?
Sherry, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think I got kicked out of. Can you put me back in? There's
Yeah.
nobody in there, luckily, so it shouldn't be an issue. But
I'll check really quick, Sherry, to see what the list looks like.
okay.
Okay, I'm gonna have to move you to one room and then back.
Okay, that's
So
fine.
because it says you're in there right now.
Interesting.
So one second.
Okay.
Hopefully it won't hurt. This
Yeah.
won't hurt a bit.
Yeah, so far, Sherry, it's just you so far. Okay, no.
And then Jack, I think you might have joined after I opened everything up. So if you know which room you'd like to join, let me know. Let me bring up a screen share of our current options.
Mike and Tom, I'm going to go back out to the UC San Diego and let them know we're checking. I'll be right back.
Thanks.
I can just pick one of the breakout rooms and join. Sorry, I
Yes.
was.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, of course.
All
Yeah,
right.
it doesn't work for everybody, so I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, I had gone to a couple of them yesterday, so there were a couple that I still wanted to see. So thank you.
No problem. I guess the other people are, maybe they're just not at their keyboards right now.
Okay, I pulled everybody out of UC San Diego. They're going to other sessions for right now.
Okay. Yeah, I've got to find out who was for them yesterday. I had trouble finding the UCSD in the registration list yesterday as well. But they were there,
Was
so
it
I don't know if
Dawn?
they were joining from a Gmail or not.
It wasn't Don Kennedy, was it?
No, it wasn't. No. I'm a little worried about going out and pulling up my UC San Diego list from my file because
No, they were recording something and they were going
Yes.
to have somebody there to answer live.
Right. And the video went really well, actually.
It was yesterday in that present.
Was it Melissa Campbell? Yeah. I think that was it. Melissa Campbell.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So she was definitely here yesterday. I don't know where she is, but maybe I'll send her a note.
I don't see her today.
Yeah, she's not logged in right now.
No.
That's for sure.
Let me send her a quick note on, I'll send her a quick email. And
do you have her email address on hand?
Get back in and
I'm scrolling all the names for today really quick here.
I sure do.
Okay, perfect.
I've got Melissa Campbell right here.
There may have been one other, but
there was one of the assistants that works there. Yeah, I don't see anybody from UC San Diego here today. Wonder if they misunderstood it was a 2-day deal.
Okay, could be, right?
Yeah.
Mike Sisson, this is Nicole. When you get a chance, can you move me into Elon's room?
Will do.
Thank you.
Did you get the notification?
Okay, method sent. Hey, Mike, thanks for your question in the last panel. Appreciated it.
Yeah, obviously a big challenge for institutions. They don't give these CLRs away.
I'll be right back, Tom. I'm going to go check on my other session. I'll
Not
be
yet.
right back.
Right. Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
That was a good discussion. Really cool what Baltimore County's doing.
Yeah, that partnership, that Greater Washington partnership is really, that's really amazing. Yeah, I hope we see more of those develop around the country.
I think about the global campus work on the CLR, but I was not aware of the extent of UMBC.
Yeah, yeah. Jack Seuss is really kind of all in on getting that work done.
That's a good reason for it to happen there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, April. If you need help getting into a breakout room, let us know. We're about halfway through the first of 3 sessions.
Yep. Thank you.
No problem.
And I'll be back in just a minute.
Thanks, Tom.
Michelle, have you managed to see any unrest in your circle from your window? You're muted.
Sorry about that. No, because I'm so far south in Wilsonville.
Yeah.
But my son's office is downtown on 6th and Main in one of the towers that overlooks the federal building.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so they got another round of really bad graffiti. But I don't know if you remember, but that main park that had the big statue of the guy on the horse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they tore all that down during the protests back in the spring. And then they've got a lot of homeless people then came in. So they're having a real problem getting the homeless people out of that square right across from the federal courthouse. So
well, Portland has certainly become the epicenter of the unrequited left.
Yes, yeah. But they're planning on kind of cleaning out the park now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
well,
yeah.
I saw the mayor was even involved in an incident of
Ted Wheeler. Yeah, my son works with him, so he knows the guy. Felt kind of bad for him. He kind of got overtaken a little bit back in the spring and summer, but yeah, and they still have a lot of buildings still boarded up in that it's about a 4 to 5 block area, just 1 block over from.
To introduce themselves in just a minute, but this panel is really about thinking about the CLR and the way that it can meet the needs of students and employers. And so this was really teased out a little bit in our equity session as we began the day, and we're going to have a chance to more fully explore this topic right now. So now that you've read names here, I'm going to stop the screen share, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Jeff King from University of Central Oklahoma. Welcome, Jeff. Please unmute and introduce yourself to the group.
Thanks, Tom. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the University of Central Oklahoma's version of a comprehensive learner record. We happen to call it our Stellar Snapshot. In my role here, I'm the executive director of our Center for Excellence in Transformative Teaching and Learning. And that is not necessarily of note other than the word transformative appears in that title. And the reason that we have a CLR is because in our mission statement, we have the words transformative education. And our approach to working with students is very much grounded in transformative learning. Those of you familiar with adult ed may recognize that. It's been around since the mid-70s-ish. But very key to that particular approach is critical reflection. And so regarding a comprehensive learner record, there was sort of a natural evolution in thinking about how are we preparing students beyond simply helping them understand and learn the discipline, the content in the discipline, because our graduates, we want them, as everyone does, to begin contributing immediately to the social good, to be motivated to do so, to possess those kinds of skills and mindsets and abilities that employers say are absolutely necessary even in a new hire, and which, as you all know, employers many times say do not exist in recent graduates to the level that they need to. So this package for us, transformative learning and the way to operationalize that and then track and assess in an evidence-based manner how those students are developing those skills, that's what led to our design, launch, and implementation. And we've been at this now for over 6 years of our Student Transformative Learning Record, STLR. And I won't go into a lot of detail about that. I've got a breakout showcase coming up after this if you're interested. But the key thing about that regarding CLRs is that the documentation, if you will, of students' development of those skills, which includes a very strong self-reflective component across the time of their undergraduate degree years at our institution, is captured on our version of the CLR. We call it our Stellar Snapshot. And the employers have been enormously positive about this. From very early on, we convened our Stellar Employer Advisory Board, representing most of the major workforce areas in the Oklahoma City metro. And they gave us great feedback on what is it that we think should be shown in this kind of a record? What makes it useful and user-friendly for hiring managers, let's say, in the interview process? What's the design, the look and feel of the thing that appeals to us? How do we ingest it into our legacy systems? All that kind of information was very much on the table, and we worked with this group, and we still have these meetings with this group, and they are working sessions. So they provided a great deal of information. We've actually had members of that group who are hiring managers talk with other institutions that have adapted and adopted Stellar exactly about how they, as a hiring manager, use the Stellar Snapshot in a hiring interview. And then very quickly from the student perspective, I'll say just the one thing which we hear so frequently from students about the value of this thing called the Stellar Snapshot. It's a formative value because they see this development across the entire time of their undergraduate degree work, and that enables them to tell their own story, not just about the development in general, but to respond in specific ways to the hiring manager's questions in an interview when hiring managers are drilling down to try and find out, well, you say you've developed leadership skills. I see it on your Stellar Snapshot. What does that mean? When did it happen? Give me an example of how you used it. And so the students have told us many times from the capstone classes, thank goodness for this documentation. It's made me feel so much better prepared to go into these interviews in my post-UCO life.
Thank you, Jeff. That's great. And I want to circle back maybe and we'll drill in just a little bit more to a couple things you said there. But before we do that, I want to get Xander back. Welcome back, Xander, for your second panel today. And tell us a little bit about your work at Elon.
Yeah, of course. Once again, my name is Alexander Taylor, Assistant Registrar at Elon University. Tom's got me through the ringer today on panels and showcases and everything. So I'm always excited presenting and everything. So I guess a little bit from the Elon perspective, since we began our work on comprehensive learner record and specifically with our experiential transcript, and we also have our certified electronic diploma as two documents. We've always been looking at it from a research perspective and a research approach on making sure to get feedback from employers and students. And like I mentioned earlier, the record is interesting because we're trying to address two different groups or two different purposes and motives. One with being the student side on empowering the student to take ownership of their learning. It's their document. I think that we all like to say that it's the student's learning and it's the student that is holding these records. But then when the institution is holding all of this information, the student needs to contact the institution to get their record. That the notion that we say that it's the student ownership comes into question when we have that. And so that's something that we've been researching and something that we wanted to get feedback on from the experiential learner, the experiential transcript that we have at Elon. The other being the employer perspective is asking, it was originally just, what do you think about this record? It started just very simply on just getting our foot in the door and asking how this information is, but then it's continued into, can we provide this information succinctly that's easily digestible, but then also give people the options of being able to get into the metadata of an experience or of a record. So it's very controllable by the user or the third party that's using this document. As well, I know that will also, I'm sure it's going to be brought up, but on the student's privacy, the student should ultimately be able to have control over what's being shared on this document, to what extent, and everything else. So I'm excited to hear more information from the employer side with Phil and Josh as well.
Thank you, Xander. Very good. So next, Joshua Westfall from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Thanks for being with us today. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work of the Chamber.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me, Tom. ACRO has been a fantastic member to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. We've been great partners and I really appreciate what we've been able to achieve and look forward to talking a little bit more about that and diving into some of that work. So as Tom said, I'm the Director of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I do want to point out as a little level setting, that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the largest business association in the world, 3 million businesses, 2,000 state and local employees. We are not the government. So I work on the foundation side of this that works on strengthening America's workforce and long-term competitiveness. So we're oftentimes working with many partners in the education community and especially the workforce community with the Chamber of Commerce. And so with all of this work, we really find that the key asset for most employers and for the workforce is finding qualified talent. And in a global workforce, the number one way we're going to compete is competing on talent. And so if we want to stay competitive, if we want to be a strong nation, it's all going to come down to that. So we've, over the time, have built some programs that are authentically employer-led, demand-driven, based on data, to really improve some of our education and workforce partnerships, be a leader in the space, better signal our needs, but also work with the community. And so if you'll indulge me just for 1 minute, I'll quickly just touch on a few things I think are work that we're very proud of, and we can go in more detail later in the panel. So our signature initiative is the Talent Pipeline Management, or TPM. And that's really just a way that we've built up education and workforce partnerships where employers are gathering data, organizing themselves, and building talent supply chains and the way that you develop and supply talent. And we base that off of metrics and ways that we can work with the community to get that qualified talent. From that work, we realized that it's not just an employer engagement problem, but there's also technology concerns. And now we're starting to get into the CLR space here, where how do we better signal what our needs are and what's in a job and how does that change over time? And so through some of our work through the Job Data Exchange, or you might hear it as an acronym JDX, we've worked to build a way to structure jobs through a job data standard that we now better explaining what are the skill sets for different jobs and occupations in certain areas. And if that wasn't enough, then we decided a few years ago, well, it's more than just the communication from employers to the education community. It's actually a two-way street and a multi-way street. So we decided to build this T3 Innovation Network, where we brought a group of government, business, education, technology providers, now 500 organizations large, ACRO being a big member in that group, to try to build this infrastructure on how are we better utilizing data and employing technology to break down some of these silos. And I could talk your head off about even more, but I'll stop there. And I know that Phil Long, he's one of our great partners in this work. He manages a lot of the technical and data work with learning and employment records, and I know he'll cover more of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Well, there we go. The nice segue to you, Phil. We first met when you were in higher ed at UT Austin. And and it was at the time when we were talking about this extended transcript at the very beginning of this work in 2015. So really good to have you back now as kind of a capstone, a nice bookend for this. So please tell us about your current work.
So as Josh noted, my primary role is to try to catalyze and support groups that are implementing representations of learning achievements in a standardized fashion in some data payload of one sort or another. And one of the primary ones is what a feature of this particular conference is about, and what Tom Acro and IMS Global and others have been so effective at promoting and developing, and that's the CLR. And so the CLR represents, or the Comprehensive Learner Record represents, a way of capturing knowledge, skills, and competencies that students acquire through formal and informal learning activities, so that they can be shared with the employers that Josh was highlighting, that the T3 Innovation Network and U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is so interested in seeing more successfully engaged in the economy, and both at the introductory level and in enhancements or steps up in their particular professions. So our work has been to foster as many different approaches to that as possible, and that involves really looking at implementing in what we call the Learning and Employment Record, which is a sort of a broader category that's anchored around something called the Verifiable Credential, which is the W3C representation of a data package that can be wrapped with metadata and signed in a way that validates, and the employer or anybody else can validate the authenticity or at least the likelihood that the package has not been tampered with when it is received. Because we do think trust in this process is really important as we transfer the responsibilities that have traditionally been institution honed, and for good reason, into the hands of individual learners, which now, with a trustable package that the institution issues and that the learner can't manipulate, is now possible for the learner to aggregate in various ways and send directly with a narrative themselves. We are very interested in further work in this area associated with how we better instrument that process so institutions know more about where those packages are going, as well as their impact on employers at the reception end. Now, institutions themselves are going to be the recipient of these packages in the future, from high schools, from other places, from other colleges and transfer, et cetera. And so you're both a consumer in terms of an institutional viewpoint, as well as a producer of these records. And that's going to be a major thing to be able to integrate properly into the systems that you have. But I'll leave it at that so that we can rip forward on these kind of conversations.
Great. Well, there's certainly a lot here. Thank you, Phil. And some of the points you brought up there were really interesting ones, and I do want to circle back a little bit on especially the security of the record and validation of claims as part of this. So let me go back to our first to Jeff and Xander, the first two folks who were speaking to us from higher ed. When you started to introduce this brand new thing, because you're both very early on, you were early adopters here. And so obviously when you went out to employers, this was something they hadn't seen before. This was a new entity. So first, two-part question, how did you go about introducing it to them? What methods did you use? And then what were some of the responses? What was their reaction to this when you first introduced these records? Maybe Jeff, I'll have you start, and Xander add on to that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It was a very interesting ride, obviously, because exactly as you suggest, this is a new concept in many ways for employers. The way that we went about the introduction is that we very definitely highly leveraged that Stellar Employer Advisory Board. And we had some very frank conversations very early on. One of the things we learned from them in these very early and frank conversations is that they did not hold programmatic advisory boards in very high esteem. In other words, we were a little bit shocked to hear that almost to a person among this group of employers, and many of them were members of, our own institutions, say engineering department advisory board, and you all know how those work in higher ed. They convene maybe twice a year. And as our employers told us, they didn't feel like it accomplished a great deal because they never felt very listened to. And this may be, hanging out our own dirty clothes on the clothesline, but this seemed to be a ubiquitous thinking or a ubiquitous idea that all of the people in our employer advisory board told us. And the reason we were asking about this is because we thought, okay, wouldn't the employers tell our universities via program advisory boards that A, they want these skills that they're not seeing, and B, let's work together to figure out how it can be that we as the employers would know this stuff that we want to know about new hires. And so the employer advisory board then, our Stellar Employer Advisory Board, coming, many of them from that background, were eager to actually maybe have a part in developing something that would be useful in this regard. And I think that motivated them, that excited them. And it was a very, very positive collaboration from the very beginning. I mentioned they helped us with design considerations, usability, and things of that nature. But another surprise that we had coming very early on was they told us, okay, no matter how this thing plays out, how it gets built, and we're delighted to be participating in that, we don't know that our legacy systems are going to be able to ingest this in an easy manner, or a manner that, will make this process work really well. So they had that concern at the beginning. But in spite of all of these kinds of feedback, when we developed our Stellar Snapshot and were in that development process, we used those employer advisory board members to do things for us, like they conducted mock interviews with our students who had their very beginning, very early stage Stellar Snapshot in place. And then they debriefed with us. And we actually have some video clips of what they said about these mock interviews. And then we also, after Stellar Snapshot had matured a bit, now we have them reporting about what is it that they like and how do they use it. So I'll close with two very quick comments about this usability. one hiring manager said to us, let me tell you exactly why this tool helps me as a hiring manager. When I see applications come through and I see a Stellar Snapshot, seeing that snapshot saves me at least 15 minutes in the job interview, because that snapshot tells me the questions I know I need to ask immediately. Because this hiring manager said, typically there's this 15-minute dance after the presentation of self by the interviewee, and then you've got to try to elicit and pull out to actually know anything about this person sitting across the desk from you. So this hiring manager said, seeing this information, this evidence-based information, saves me a bunch of time because it tells me the questions that I can use to drill in. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which we hear commonly, is that using this snapshot has saved a great deal of time in terms of what the interviewees take time doing in responding to the hiring manager questions. And so these hiring managers tell us things like, typically when I ask XYZ question, and here's a perfect example, because one hiring manager told us exactly this. He said after they do their presentation and they go through their brag sheet, and he smiles and listens and nods his head. And then he says, this is all wonderful. You've accomplished great things. How has any of this prepared you to add value to my company if I hire you for this position? And he said 9 times out of 10, it's deer in the headlights at that point. But he said with the Stellar Snapshot, not only could the interviewee answer that question, but they could tell him exactly how they could add value, and they could tell him exactly where they developed this capacity. And he said what it did from his perspective as a hiring manager was it was so much more informative for from the interviewee's point of view in terms of what they're saying to him.
Those are great examples, Jeff. I really like that, especially the examples about the student, the interviewee being able to elucidate, being able to say, okay, here's where I got it, here's where I did it. And that was something we heard a bit of early on in this process, was that students didn't even remember all the things they'd done in college, much less be able to recount them. So Xander, in your experience with this, were you having, similar experiences? Were you having some different experiences? And also, how did you approach interfacing with employers to ask for their feedback on these records?
Yeah, of course. So in the last 5 years, and it's pretty incredible where we started and where we are right now, not only from the CLR landscape, but just from the technology side, the amount of platforms and options that we have as institutions. It's incredible where we are right now and how it can continue to improve. When we started in 2015 with our first visual transcript, the first iteration, because it was so new to employers, when we were designing and implementing our first iteration, we were trying to make a document that wasn't foreign to or unrecognizable to an employer. It honestly looked extremely similar to the academic transcript. It was sort of on professional letterhead, on academic EON letterhead. There were it was more or less another list of experiences that students participated in, similar to the academic transcript, and we were providing that information. And we got good feedback. It was, of course, new for employers, but then as we began to test what's the design of this, how can an employer or how can a third party ingest this information, that's where I think the project's now much more visually appealing, less about the chronological sort of list or ledger of what's been going on, but more of what are the core themes of what your institution is participating in. I think that it's extremely important that you create a comprehensive learner record that's based on the mission and values of your institution, not just following what everyone else is doing, because similar to students, as you're marketing to them about why they should be coming to your institutions, that employers are thinking in the exact same way. Why this student, what's unique about their experience compared to others, and how can you inform students about that experience through your record, through the experiences that are captured. And so I guess that's where we started off. Since then, this has grown beyond just sort of a PDF transcript, that we now have platforms that cater to these, that can hold all this information, collect from all these different data sources, and be able to package this to an employer or to a third party.
And I remember, and you even showed some of the tables in our first panel from your surveys. You've surveyed a lot of your employers and asked them time over time, right? What, is this adding value? Is this making a difference? Did it make you see this interviewee differently as a result of having this or not? And I remember those tended to be all pretty positive, right? That the hiring managers saw positivity, but I think this issue of utility, right, was one that really was, at least at this point, it's nascent yet, and we'll ask Phil about that just a little bit here, but this idea that we can actually create something that can be ingested beyond a document that has to be viewed, right, that has to be sat with and viewed and digested. Although I will say, anybody who's seen either of your CLRs actually really likes their visual utility. And I know some of that was also the product of feedback from employers of sharpening that. I remember at UCO, you changed the icons. And at Elon, you changed some of the formatting with it based on employer feedback from that end. So thank you. Josh, I'm going to ask you the $64,000 question here, which everybody wants to know. What are employers looking for? Right? How do we as higher education start to respond to that? What are some of the perhaps barriers to us more clearly communicating our needs back and forth?
Thanks, Tom. Well, you're right. That is a $64 million question. Talking to employers, I think getting more granular data about students, and even for employers themselves, getting more granular data about their own employees, that gets down to the skill and competency level. What are they actually able to do? How do you define those skills, and how can they be assessed and show that they're able to actually complete what they're saying they're doing? And so it's more than just the proxy of, do you have a credential? Do you have a degree? Did you get a certificate? It's more of, well, what did those offer you? What are the talents you bring to the table? And I think Jeff and Alexander really hit on a lot of those points of, when you're talking to employers, they want to work with you on it. They want to use your transcript and find a way to work with their systems. I think the hardest part of why this is such a big issue to try to solve for is really then, well, what's the feasibility of making it happen? When you go on the employer side, they have their HRS systems. They have their data standards. They have their ways of doing business that are based on their use cases and their needs. Oftentimes, even if you go down to K through 12 and into higher ed, there's certain data standards there. They have certain LMS and SI systems, and very rarely do they speak to each other. And I think that's really the point that as we're moving forward in the 21st century, post-COVID, and this whole change of workforce, is now getting to that granularity of what information do you have? How can it be transferred and digested from my system? And how can my system do that back to your system? And I think that's where LERs come into play. That's where these data records with CLRs come into play, is making that possible. So it's an exciting time. And I think that there's a lot of good actors out there trying to make this work.
Oh, thanks, Josh. And we'll probably circle back. Even I think there are some great questions popping up in chat that we can get to as well in just a few minutes. But I want to go next to Phil because this idea of interoperability and verifiable learning claims, I thought back to the very beginning of this when we first started to hear the buzz about, you know, these type of things. I remember at that time something simultaneous was happening, which was that people were really using LinkedIn, especially here in the US, a lot more. And so there were all kinds of things going up there. And I remember that I started to get endorsed for things that I'd never done. And I, you know, thought about that and thought, well, hold it. Don't we have some kind of role in verifying these claims? And just about that time, this idea of the extended transcript, which became the CLR, was starting to float in. And I thought, maybe this is a way that we can truly verify, right, some of the claims, at least about higher education, that people make. But that, of course, assumes a big leap in interoperability and security of records. So can you talk a little bit about that and the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Yes, I think LinkedIn deserves credit for spurring us to address the problem of misinformation. I know that there are more people with degrees from MIT on LinkedIn than have ever attended the institution. So it's certainly a significant issue, and it's really about, I think, the problem that was mentioned by both Jeff and Xander, which is employers need to be able to have confidence in the information they see. If they can, that allows them to cut time away from having to do that validation and verification on their own, or have that outsourced, which they often have to pay to have done. And so it's immediate cost savings for them if they can trust it. So the ability to have a trustable record is contingent on what's emerged in the last 3 or 4 years, which is the ability to be able to have something that you can digitally sign and then validate that the signature is in fact accurate. And we have, you know, we've seen that in its earlier forms with PDF documents and signing those for real estate transactions and such. What we're finding now is that that technology is getting to the point and has reached the point that the CLR and even the individual elements in it, depending on how you choose to package it, can allow the expression of those assertions of achievement to be individually cryptographically signed or signed in different subsets, so that the individual student has the opportunity to begin to tell a story with verified data about their experiences and provide that narrative punctuated with factual information that can be confirmed. And I think that's the real opportunity. And it goes back to what Xander and Jeff have said before, and that is we really want to give the students the opportunity to narrate their own experience based on the institutions and the organizations they've had the pleasure of working with and having their achievements recognized, but have that something that can be presented in a way that they themselves can organize, that is, curate for themselves for the particular job that's being sought, and have that punctuated by these validatable points. That is a really critical thing. Now, I would like to also note that employers are trying to see where the signal value is. And one of the challenges, and I think higher ed knows this, and is the reason why the extended transcript really got such attention, is that the signal value of a terminal degree at this point from many institutions doesn't say a whole lot about what any given individual can do in a job with a particular starting area of requirements. And that is something that typically has been done in the interview process to extract out, well, so what is that degree in X biology mean for your ability to do work in managing people coming into a public health office? Well, it's a stretch unless there is both better granular data on the learning part that describes those activities, which can go into a CLR. And the student is aware of that because it's been presented to them and they've interacted with it in the course of their training and educational experience. And then now are more able to articulate the knowledge that they have acquired to the actual skills and competencies they need to demonstrate. So we think we have the verification part working and going. Where we are needing effort and work and collaboration with our institutions is the identity piece. There aren't any institutions out there that I know of that have a truly digital identity that is independent of the institution, or which can be validated independent of the institution. There are opportunities that have emerged recently if many institutions are using social login, for example, which is a particular form of implementation of something called OAuth. There's now a mechanism for leveraging that, co-opting that, if you will, to be able to validate an identification of a person. So we have a bridge that's emerged, which we can potentially take advantage of, and which institutions, many in this group, are already using in another context. So the stretches, the distance is shorter to achieve it. Employers on their part, Josh mentioned, are getting this information in a way that's more easily digestible. They're getting a view of it in the presentation of the CLR, which is more effective for them, but getting it from there into a computationally ingested method to get into their own systems, as opposed to simply do screenshots and retype it in. Remains to be the barrier that we have to achieve. And the good news is there are groups like HR Open that we're partnering with in the T3 organization that are building data models that can accept the kinds of data in the CLR into their, in their case, HR Open records of varying sorts, whether it's ultimately going from a comprehensive learner record to an earning record. And there's discussions about the language of that, but nevertheless, that's the currency of skills and qualities that actually translate into income that we need to be able to document for learners, and which are in, as a starting point, the CLR at the entry point. So, so that's an important next step for us.
And Phil, that's a great point. I'm seeing this thread weave through some of our platforms and conversations throughout this conference of, you know, we're working on standards on our side so that we can hopefully interface with standards elsewhere, right? So that, exactly. Right, because these big intake systems that a lot of the major employment areas use are like our own SIS, right? That they're intaking data streams and information that we've automated and created ways of doing that based on standards. And now we're trying to get these things to start to talk to each other or be able to understand the information that's coming from one source and going to another source. I had to chuckle just a little bit about the point about taking a piece of paper and typing it back in. We've had the SPEEDY standard now for almost 30 years, and still there's way too much instance of transcripts being received in PDFs and then typed back into systems. So, you know, let's hope that this is yet another advancement in getting people to use the data streams.
We want to do what the vaccine folks have done in 8 months that used to take 8 years.
There you go. Yeah. And Josh, I want to ask something that popped up in the chat about small businesses, because oftentimes, and even when we were thinking about, you know, ingestion of these records, that works really well with, you know, a Google or an AT&T or something who have these big intake systems. But what about the small businesses that employ so many people? How, what comments would you have about this moving forward to them?
Yeah, it's a good observation. And the solution for that from the small business person's standpoint, at least a couple conversations we've had on this topic, is that because many times the small businesses do not have sophisticated applicant tracking systems necessarily or ingestion systems, although that's becoming much easier and more affordable for them to do. But if the CLR is available to be presented in a way that fits with the way they've quote unquote always done business, then at least it doesn't kick them out of the sandbox. In other words, if, for example, one of our students, our graduates, had an employer say, and students have said this to us, send it to me as a PDF, because that's how I know our review committee or the hiring manager is going to want to print it out and use it. And as long as you can do that for those small businesses that aren't in that scenario where they've got these sophisticated systems, then you don't disadvantage the small business. I'd finish, Tom, with just two really quick observations, and both Phil and Xander had touched on this earlier, and that is learners owning their own stuff in order to be able to tell their own story. And one of the things that excites me about the CLR is that, yes, it serves this purpose in terms of how institutions think about CLRs, but if your CLR as a learner goes into an electronic wallet or some other similar mechanism, then that wallet is also the place where you have your CLR version, your academic transcript, all of the badges, and if they're 2.1 compliant, then tracking back to what Phil mentioned as the evidence means that employers can trust this, but a learner who's self-sovereign with that batch of stuff can tell her story even better than just based on the CLR. So I think that is an enormous, enormous opportunity here that CLRs have to contribute to what is clearly going to be the future of employers looking not just at transcripts from universities, but looking at badges from coding academies, certifications, everything. And you've got to have a place to keep that stuff together so that it's dependable, verifiable, a self-sovereign place. We happen to be delighted to be working with eLocker, which has met the IMS standard, one of the first ones on that. But that's an incredibly exciting opportunity for CLRs.
Thanks, Jeff. Phil, you've got a comment on this, I know.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up by saying, and part of it is a shout out to the North Dakota LER project that we've been working with, which includes RANDA and the state of North Dakota's education system, where they have actually built a credential publisher that creates a verified credential based on the CLR as the data payload, which is open source and available to everybody to download from the GitLab hub site of IEEE. And I say that because it's the first opportunity for anybody that may not have all of the technical wherewithal and the like that goes behind some of these tools to be able to start to do that with something that just works on their own. The other side of that is the employers generate learning experience for their employees. And often that needs to be and is valuable to document equally. And as Jeff mentioned, they're not usually as well equipped as some of our larger institutions from a technological point of view. So asking them to run a system that generates a CLR, that signs it, and that pushes it out to a digital wallet for a 200-person company that's trying to get by with a couple of Excel spreadsheets and maybe a tax system that they connect to is a big ask. And so we need to then break these things like the credential publisher tool up into manageable components and have new opportunities for businesses or universities to run pieces of those on their behalf so that this can be an easier lift for the employer. And I think it's that sort of direction that we're trying to move for. And we welcome other institutions in attending this group to work with us to develop LERs of their own unique capabilities. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Phil. Josh, last comment, and then we're thank you.
Great. Well, I would say just the last comment is we talked a lot about interoperability and systems and data standards. And I think one of the principles of the T3 network, but what we've just found nationwide through all of our different programs is we're not going to find one language, one platform, or one standard to rule them all. We're not going to make everyone happy by choosing one and then everyone has to accept it. I think where we are in society now is the openness and the ability to have access and ability to understand what data is being used and how it's being used, and then possibly some open code or ways to ingest it. that becomes more of the marketplace we're looking for and more of the free enterprise system of the talent marketplace that I think would benefit even those who are creating the technology to get more people involved in.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. And please join me in thanking our panelists today. It was a great discussion and just so rich. And I think we could have gone on even a lot longer with it. So thank you so much for being here, contributing to this. We do have a break now, and I'm going to try and get us to make up a little bit of our time and be back here at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so less than a 15-minute break. But again, we are going to go to our Gather Voices gallery, and you'll see this loop playing on the screen as we go to break. And for those institutions who participated in our project, we really encourage you to go out to the Gather Voices gallery and create a reflection, because we are adding to the technologies we're using to try and capture information about the CLR in this project. So that's going to add even more to this. So enjoy your break, and we'll see you back here in just about 11 minutes, and we'll do our next showcase round then. Thank you.
We were excited to participate in this Comprehensive Learner Record project. We feel that this CLR really helps to showcase the students' skills that they've gained through their program, and then able to convey those to a prospective employer. A transcript really does not do the student justice. It doesn't tell their story.
One of our primary goals was to develop a framework that allowed them to reflect on all of the pieces and parts. It's not uncommon for a student to get to the end of their career and not even remember some of the things that they had done as freshmen and how they started building towards their overall education in and outside of the classroom. So we tied all of the various frameworks on campus that are used, mapped them to one main framework. So no matter what area the student specializes in, or whether they were an athlete, or they were a student leader on campus, or both, perhaps they held jobs, that they can tie those experiences that we've documented for them together and realize that they have been learning things like leadership skills and communication skills.
In the college system of Tennessee, the CLR has yet to be implemented, but our goal and hope is that the Comprehensive Learner Record will provide students not only with a tool that they can use during their time at our institutions to look at their experiences and where there might be gaps, things that they might want to do still before they graduate, but also a tool that employers and even universities could use when students transfer to see the specific skills and competencies that the students gain while they were enrolled at our institutions.
Hi, my name is Alicia, and I earned my Master's of Human Resources Management with Rasmussen University. And I earned that degree while I was working full-time, which meant there was a lot to juggle, and it often felt like a whirlwind. It was really easy to feel like I forgot what I had learned in my last class because I would become so focused on forging ahead into the next class. So when I graduated, it did feel like a huge accomplishment, but I really wanted to be sure that I could articulate the skills and the knowledge that I had gained through all of that effort. So the Comprehensive Learner Record provided to me by Rasmussen is amazing. It's such a great tool to reflect back on what I've accomplished and present those achievements to others in a sensible way. Every core concept that I proved proficiency in and learned throughout my program is clearly laid out here. And that is an invaluable asset for employers and professional communications, and even telling my family and friends about what I've learned and what I achieved. And I just really like to reflect back on this to myself so I can sort of remind myself, look at all these amazing things that I learned, and really feel a sense of accomplishment there. So as I move forward in life, I really am going to use this tool to help me confidently speak to what earning my master's degree really means and how exactly I'm better for it.
We are super excited about the Comprehensive Learner Record and what it does for our students' metacognition. It gets them thinking about their thinking. Instead of fixating on letter grades and GPA, they're focused on skills, how they have demonstrated those skills in their academic programs, but also how they can communicate those skills to their employer or their future employer once they graduate and get out into the world or workforce.
On behalf of the College System of Tennessee, I want to thank ACRO for their support in bringing professional development to our faculty and staff across the state of Tennessee as we began thinking about building a comprehensive learner record for all of our students and at all of our institutions across the state. It is no doubt without their support, we would not have been able to get this far in our project. And so I want to personally thank Tom Green and all of the staff at ACRO, as well as the support that we received through NASPA and the Lumina Foundation in helping us to think through how to build a comprehensive learner record.
We were excited to participate in this Comprehensive Learner Record project. We feel that this CLR really helps to showcase the students' skills that they've gained through their program and then able to convey those to a prospective employer. A transcript really does not do the student justice. It doesn't tell their story.
One of our primary goals was to develop a framework that allowed them to reflect on all of the pieces and parts. It's not uncommon for a student to get to the end of their career and not even remember some of the things that they had done as freshmen and how they started building towards their overall education in and outside of the classroom. So we tied all of the various frameworks on campus that are used and mapped them to one main framework. So no matter what area the student specializes in, or whether they were an athlete, or they were a student leader on campus, or both, perhaps they held jobs, that they can tie those experiences that we've documented for them together and realize that they have been learning things like leadership skills and communication skills.
In the College System of Tennessee, the CLR has yet to be implemented, but our goal and hope is that the Comprehensive Learner Record will provide students not only with a tool that they can use during their time at our institutions to look at their experiences and where there might be gaps, things that they might want to do still before they graduate, but also a tool that employers and even universities could use when students transfer to see the specific skills and competencies that the students gain while they were enrolled at our institutions.
Hi, my name is Alicia, and I earned my Master's of Human Resources Management with Rasmussen University. And I earned that degree while I was working full-time, which meant there was a lot to juggle, and it often felt like a whirlwind. It was really easy to feel like I forgot what I had learned in my last class because I would become so focused on forging ahead into the next class. So when I graduated, it did feel like a huge accomplishment, but I really wanted to be sure that I could articulate the skills and the knowledge that I had gained through all of that effort. So the Comprehensive Learner Record provided to me by Rasmussen is amazing. It's such a great tool to reflect back on what I've accomplished and present those achievements to others in a sensible way. Every core concept that I proved proficiency in and learned throughout my program is clearly laid out here. And that is an invaluable asset for employers and professional communications, and even telling my family and friends about what I've learned and what I achieved. And I just really like to reflect back on this to myself so I can sort of remind myself, look at all these amazing things that I learned, and really feel a sense of accomplishment there. So as I move forward in life, I really am going to use this tool to help me confidently speak to what earning my master's degree really means and how exactly I'm better for it.
We are super excited about the comprehensive learner record and what it does for our students' metacognition. It gets them thinking about their thinking instead of fixating on letter grades and GPA. They're focused on skills, how they have demonstrated those skills in their academic programs, but also how they can communicate those skills to their employer or their future employer once they graduate and get out into the world or workforce.
On behalf of the College System of Tennessee, I want to thank ACRO for their support in bringing professional development to our faculty and staff across the state of Tennessee as we began thinking about building a comprehensive learner record for all of our students and at all of our institutions across the state. It is no doubt without their support, we would not have been able to get this far in our project. And so I want to personally thank Tom Green and all of the staff at ACRO, as well as the support that we received through NASPA and the Lumina Foundation in helping us to think through how to build a comprehensive learner record.
We were excited to participate in this comprehensive learner record project. We feel that this CLR really helps to showcase the students' skills that they've gained through their program and then able to convey those to a prospective employer. A transcript really does not do the student justice. It doesn't tell their story.
One of our primary goals was to develop a framework that allowed them to reflect on all of the pieces and parts. It's not uncommon for a student to get to the end of their career and not even remember some of the things that they had done as freshmen and how they started building towards their overall.
All right, are we ready for our breakouts, Tom?
And here I was talking, Mike, and I was muted. Only fitting at the end of a Zoom session to do that,
Yeah.
right? So welcome back, folks. That was a quick break, but we are really glad to have everybody back here. Again, this is the fourth of our four sessions, so this is your last chance to get out there and explore some of these institutions that are doing this work. So please move to those breakout rooms. Mike will give you a little bit of direction here before we do that. But again, a reminder, I think a little typo here. This one closes in 1 hour at 3 p.m. on the nose. We'll be back in for our final panel today. Mike, what instruction would you have for this group?
No real instructions any different than before. If you were not around for the first session or for any of them yesterday, I'll open these up and you'll be able to self-select which breakout you go into based on the institution. So if you're a presenter and that's just now joining us, just select that corresponds with yours and you'll stay in that room the whole time. For all other participants who are not presenting, we'll have 20-minute timers that I'll just announce via chat. And when you hit that 20 minutes, you can hop out of one room and then self-select another one. If you have any trouble getting in and out of those rooms, I'll be here the whole time. So you can just change your name by right-clicking your portrait and I can reassign you based on that, or you can just give me a shout out through chat or via voice. So have fun, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. See everybody soon. And Mike, I will leave this up for just a minute as people are selecting rooms, just so they have the roster available to them.
Yeah, perfect. I can put on my separate laptop one up if you want.
Okay.
After this initial round, anyway.
Yep, that sounds great.
Yep, and I'm still keeping an eye on names. So if you're having trouble joining, I see Southern Indiana there. If you're having any trouble joining, just let me know.
We're down to just a few people left here. So now that we've got one window, it might be easier to spot anybody who needs to move. Emma Miller probably needs to move to South Texas for her presentation. And I see Purdue Global, the name change there. Chris DeVoe from the chat, I think you may have already gotten him moved. Yep, thank you. And Mike, if you have a chance, can you move Emma Miller to South Texas College, please?
Yeah, for some reason it's not showing up.
Oh, were they in the first group?
Yeah, they were in the first. I was just making sure. I was
My
like, I'm
bad.
pretty sure I
Sorry.
got the right
My
ones.
bad. SNHU put in Purdue Global.
Yeah, he should be in there now.
Cool.
Oh, Purdue Global. Sorry, there we go. And then, yeah,
Hey, Mike.
Okay.
Nicole, I'm asking you to put me into Southern New Hampshire University.
Sure.
I think you put me in Purdue Global. Thank you.
You're welcome. Wait, where was that? Where did you want to go?
Southern New Hampshire University.
Oh, sure. Oh, what confused me, I saw in the chat SNHU into Purdue Global.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I just renamed myself.
It was Chris DeVoe, so I think that's what confused me.
Trying
Got
to run
it.
the old trick play.
Yeah. All right.
So, Mike, we have to end this one right at 3 because one of our 3 o'clock panelists has to go right at 3:30. She's
Okay.
got a conflict, but she'll stay till the last second. It's Amelia. It's going to stay at the last second on the panel.
Okay. All right.
So
So
if
I
you
might just because the first round of putting people in always takes a little bit longer, I might give an extra minute on this session and then cut the final one
Right.
short just so we end at 3.
I think that's fine. That's great, Mike. Thank you. Give me a minute. I'll be right back, and then I'll start popping around to different rooms and checking in on folks.
Summer, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I am.
Perfect. Can you check in on Lipscomb? Just make sure. I think yesterday there weren't people in there, so I just want to make sure. I think Nancy Carter is their presenter.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Mike. Yeah, they're going fine.
Okay, sweet. And somebody's joined as Galaxy A50. And since you're from a phone, you might not have the ability to jump into a room. So assuming you can see the screen share, if you, from that second column, want to choose a room, I can put you in one.
things seem to be going on, and seems like we're doing okay.
Yep. No issues so far, and actually very few people had to move there, even fewer than before.
So at the end of all this, they're finally getting the hang of it.
Yeah, for better or worse. Hey, Sherry, did you want to get into a different session than Indiana?
No, I just was peeking in. I'm going to go into Purdue for the next session. Thanks.
Okay, perfect.
Great. And if someone's looking for a place to go, I'd suggest Rasmussen, because they've had pretty low numbers in there and they've got a pretty well-developed CLR. So if somebody pops out and they go, oh, I'm looking around, I'm not sure where to go, you might suggest that one.
I'll put it in the breakout session.
Nice.
Or the broadcast message.
Yeah, great. Okay.
All right. And yeah, so welcome back, everybody. If you need help getting to your next room, let me know.
And if you're looking for a place to go, Mike mentioned Rasmussen. You might also look at Winston-Salem State University. It's a great example of an HBCU that's doing this work. And they've done some really fantastic things, especially with the co-curriculum.
And then I'm not sure who renamed themselves to UMBC, but that was a session from the original breakout round. So the ones that are being on the screen share right now, those are the ones that are available. And I'm still scrolling through the unassigned right now, so apologies if I'm missing you. Hey, Colin, do you know which room you need to get into, or are you able to self-select? And whoever named themselves Missouri, I've assigned you there. You should have the option of pressing a join button somewhere on your dashboard. Sure thing, Colin. And for anybody that's not assigned, if you have trouble, feel free to type something in chat or just let me know over voice. And Teresa, do you need help getting to another session, or are you taking a little break?
to do a little bit more on that. Okay, and just a reminder of our
We can do that.
topics. Say it again.
I said, I think we can do that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We're talking about evolving and gaining traction. Hey, Phil. And then key issues. Amelia, you had a few about advising our partnerships. We've got data integration. Mike, you had raised that. And then Phil, you had some skills and ethics with AI. So we'll try and cover all those well within our 30 minutes here. So, and I think Mike Sisson's just getting all the rooms closed up right now. Some of the tricks of doing this are interesting, where if I have the screen show up and I stop sharing, if I go back to that, it's still in screen show mode. And I can't do anything except get out of it. All right. I think we're sweeping everybody back in here from the room. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will start our panel up here in just a second. Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are sweeping back into the main room here from the showcase sessions, hope you enjoyed those and had a good chance to engage with people and learn more about the various implementations that people have been making with the CLRs across the country. So this is a chance for us to, at the end of our showcase, to take a few moments to really look forward and think about where this will be moving. And so I've asked three folks to join me here today. You can see them on the screen. We've got Phil Long, who was just in our last panel from T3, so I'm sure you've had a little chance to meet him with it. But then also from our very first panel of the showcase, Dr. Amelia Parnell from NASPA and the Executive Director of ACRO, Mike Riley. So let's start with Mike. This is your first panel here. Folks have not had a chance to meet you yet as part of the showcase. Tell us a little bit about ACRO's work and its relationship to this topic of CLRs.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome, everybody. Of course, you know a good bit about ACRO. We've been around a long time, 110 years. We represent registrars, admissions, and enrollment management professionals. And we have been debating about what a transcript should look like since 1910. And in fact, at our very first meeting in 1910, 30 registrars came together in Detroit. They formed a little subcommittee to work on the details of a transcript, and we're still working on it. So it's obviously been an important issue for us. So kind of reflecting back here when we started, first, we did the right thing by focusing on students when we first started in this work. I mean, that allowed us to really gather the formative dimension of this, and you've heard a lot of that discussed during the conversation. We made clear that CLRs did not necessarily replace traditional transcripts. That helped bring our registrar colleagues in. They're not worried that we're going to completely blow this up. But certainly now that we've done that, as we move forward, we need to start thinking about the other audience that learners want to share their records with. And of course, that certainly includes employers. So that's why the partnerships with the T3 network and the Chamber of Commerce Foundation are really so important, because that is an important next step. We have a standard to be able to use. And I'll be honest with you, when we first started, we really thought, let's not worry too much about standards here. Standards are often best when they kind of work around a convergence of practice. But we did really find fairly early in the project that not having a standard wasn't a bit of an impediment to us moving forward. So thanks to IMS Global and the work that Tom and ACRO and the partnership to develop a standard. So moving forward, we really do, with the standard and other tools, need to make CLRs easier for campuses to implement. That's why it's so exciting in this gathering to see all the solutions out there, that we have companies that are embracing the new standard, embracing the CLR and helping it make it easier, because we're not going to do these, we're not going to build these independently on our campuses. And then I think you talked about this some earlier. We need to start thinking about institutions not just being producers of CLRs, but consumers. And we know that the transcript has actually served the academy pretty well. That wasn't necessarily a solution we needed to fix. It has facilitated transfer. Graduate deans know how to use it to admit students to graduate programs. But the CLR could help with some of the shortcomings of the transcript. One, for example, I think about an independent study. Brenda, you probably call it, English 499 or something. And then the recipient institution says, what do I do with this? We don't have enough information. But in particular, I think PLA is an area we need to look at. From our research, we know that the majority of institutions will not accept PLA and transfer if it's indicated as PLA on a transcript. They'll just cross it out, force the student to lose that credit and go through another set of hurdles to be able to get the credit. Some of that is because the institutions just don't have enough information about how the credit was awarded. And now with the CLR, we can see learning outcomes, we can see competencies, perhaps assessments, perhaps artifacts of learning, and give a lot more confidence to the institution to be able to recognize that learning. And the other thing that I think this will help with is to break us of this notion that the only credit that's worthy of going against a college degree is that earned in a structured course. I mean, we're just so wedded to that concept. And once you don't fixate on how the student acquired the knowledge, but that they have the knowledge, then I think that opens up lots of opportunities for things like PLA. And we also saw in the conversation earlier that we're going to become consumers from records coming from the secondary level. We already see that with the mastery transcript that's beginning to develop. There's consortiums of schools doing that. We know that high schools have asked colleges and universities to recognize the portfolios of students as part of the admissions process. And from the IMS Global meeting that a number of us joined, boy, it seems like an eternity ago, but it was in Atlanta, maybe a year ago. I see a lot of my colleagues who were there. We were pleased to learn that secondary schools are beginning to produce comprehensive learner records. So I think once that's sort of the dream of this, is more of a continuum from secondary, used in admissions, part of the learning process at colleges, into employers for employment purposes, used as part of training and employment, and then lifelong learning. So that's where I think the future of this is, Tom.
That's great, Mike. Yeah, we're not talking about one-offs in a lot of the secondary schools. Broward County, Florida, and the state of North Dakota, among a lot of institutions who are interested in the mastery transcript. And yes, I remember about a year ago being in the state of Washington and talking to their education board about this concept of the CLR, because as a state, they're interested in this. So a lot of traction is coming at us. So whether we're ready for CLRs or not, we may be getting them, and need to make sure that we're ready to understand them and use them sensibly in that. Great, thank you very much. Thank you for coming back as a bookend to this, from our first panel to this one that we're closing out the meeting on. Tell us a little bit more about NASPA. For those of folks who are here visiting today who might be from outside of higher ed directly, or may not be as familiar with NASPA as an organization, first tell us a little bit about that, and then a little bit about NASPA's association with this work.
Mm-hmm. So NASPA as a membership association is probably similar to what you would expect from ACRO or any of the other membership associations in higher education, in that our primary purpose is, of course, to convene professionals from across the country and provide professional development, training, services, and a sense of community and all the things that you would expect. I think within the function of student affairs, which is the primary focus of NASPA, there have been a lot of conversations about what students need to have a holistic and integrated learning experience, social experience, academic academic experience, all the things that you would say would make a student feel like they had a rich opportunity to learn as much as possible in a welcoming and inclusive environment. So as a result, NASPA's portfolio of topics and issues and services ranges from things that probably would be far outside of the scope of this conversation, but definitely relevant to the student experience. So equity, inclusion, diversity, social justice, mental health, well-being initiatives, housing, academic advising, career advising. And so the list goes on and on and on. And so as a result, I think that for decades, there have been a lot of professionals who are connected to NASPA or just connected to student affairs that have been saying students have been learning in all types of environments. And I think first efforts to document that, similar to the traditional transcript, have been a co-curricular transcript, which might look at first as like a listing of clubs and activities associated with what term you did it in and how many hours. And that was fine for a period of time. I think if we can go back to the 90s, maybe early 2000s, that was there. But the same sentiment that Mike expressed, I think the same thing was happening in student affairs, which is that's a good start, but does it really show where the learning actually happens? And so I think the meeting that Mike Riley and Kevin Kruger from NASPA, who says hello, had to just start this conversation and say, where could we go with this? Led us to a really special place. And I don't know if Tom, you remember this, but almost 5 years ago to the day, around the same time as a terrible snowstorm that came to DC, we hosted a separate discussion with about 20 schools who all wrote us immediately after that press release came out. And they said, I want to be a part of this project. And we knew we could only choose 8 schools, but we didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk to some schools who said, we have great interest. We think we'd like to do this. And it was a whole day of conversations. And we said, where would you like to go from here? And they actually outlined several of the things from these conversations, like how can we make these records integrate with our student information system? How can we get more buy-in from faculty and others and things like that? So NASPA, I think for a long time has been, holding the flag up to say we have been providing rich learning experiences outside the classroom. But I do think we needed a vehicle to make it more concrete and more widely used. And so I think as a result, we'll start to see some of those schools that have been watching on the sidelines a little bit longer say, now that I see what the comprehensive learner record looks like, how can we actually adopt this and put this through, our regular day-to-day work? And so I think in the future, we'll see maybe 2 things that I would highlight. One is the team of professionals that are involved in delivering these records expand significantly. I think through the last several years, we've been talking very heavily about the partnership between not just ACRO and NASPA, but student affairs and the registrar. And then of course, we see campuses also bring in faculty. But I think that there are 2 additional groups that will be integral to this, actually maybe 3. The communications department at the campus or even within divisions, just to get the word out. I think advising offices, those who are actually working directly with students to tell them what their options are, and any function that has the role of assessment or institutional research or a primary use of data to show the effectiveness of these records on students' progression on the campus. So the future for us probably holds more of the same, which is that we'll still be saying that opportunities exist outside the classroom to be learning. And I think if anything, I'll continue to bug Tom and Mike and others on this call to see what we can do to keep the momentum going. So I won't hog all the time, but I hope that sums up a little bit about NASPA and our approach.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
You forgot about that meeting. Yeah.
I remember the meeting. I forgot about the snowstorm. Maybe that's like certain kinds of pain that they just
they just put it out of your memory.
Yeah. Point there. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we'll probably come back and visit a couple of the points that you made there because they're really good ones, Amelia. Phil, you were just on a panel we were talking about, but I wanted to offer you a chance just to talk a little bit more about T3 and the aims of T3. How did it come to be with it? And then also just kind of talk a little bit about, T3's interest in partnering with the higher education community.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Well, T3 started, I think, with the interest in the business world coming from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce itself, which sponsored the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And in most significantly, their concerns there had been trying to smooth the friction, if you will, out of the talent pipeline, both at the intake end and as people moved across organizations or upwards within their organizations. And so the first area of focus of T3 was about that. And the interest to move or open consideration more broadly, particularly with respect to higher education, was driven by the employers who were frustrated by what some degree of discernment of the signals that are coming from their traditional transcripts in terms of their ability to map skills and capabilities that those signals presented to the actual jobs people had. And so there was a concern about the amount of energy that was being spent to validate what the transcript was telling an individual employer about the capabilities of the student for particular jobs. And that led to a recognition that there needed to be a much deeper partnership with organizations like yourselves and IMS Global and others, because the only way forward we all seemed to agree on at the beginning was that it has to be standards based. We can all solve this problem in our own little cliques, and we may solve it to a certain degree, but it won't solve it for our students as a community because they are transient. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that in that we are looking at, many people are starting to think about it in terms of the 60-year curriculum, people coming in and out of institutions over time and needing to be able to have what they were doing before be recognized in the various forms that they acquired it. The prior learning assessment is a classic example of that, but also in terms of the other kinds of skills and documentation that are proliferating in terms of different types of certificates and badges and short programs and things of that sort, which may or may not be stackable. And if so, what's the mapping among these things? And so that complexity led, I think, the T3 to think about, we really need to have standards. We really need to focus on interoperability amongst those standards. And we need to focus on practical examples that bring these things together so we can learn from those processes. And the main thing that was driving it was a recognition that, at least from the technology perspective, the movement is towards decentralization. And decentralization at the same time prioritizes the learner. And that is an alignment with a lot of learner-centric pedagogical practice, evolution, and the like, which we think is perfectly dovetailing with the way in which the technology is moving. So that's kind of the background.
Great. Oh, thank you, Phil. And your point there that you made about the transcript, I want to throw this back to Mike a little bit, is that when we look at the transcript and even try and read it, right, you almost have to be a code breaker at times because and it's still true in a lot of systems today, but has been true more in the past, that you only got a certain number of characters to even put the course title on the transcript. And I think some of them wound up without even a vowel, much less a space. So trying to understand what was on a transcript became kind of a mysterious adventure for people. And I think we've all had our experiences or seen, folks who are struggling with that. And, on the inside of it, as registrars and records professionals, admissions professionals, we know probably more about that decoding, right, than others. But take that outside of the academy, or even to other parts of the academy, it becomes much less clear for people. Mike, you're muted.
Sorry, I was going to say the panel we had at the tech transfer meeting in Austin, Texas, as a matter of fact, all three of the employers to a person said, we don't use transcripts. They don't add any value. So it's a little stab in the heart to those of us who are in the transcript business, but we get it.
Yeah, and that I remember that really well. That was something that stuck, or a pain that didn't go away. Was hearing all three of those young CEOs with really promising tech startups, the exact kind of businesses that we want our graduates to be able to move to, tell us that the thing we've been producing for maybe 1,000 years, right, this ledger type of record, was essentially not really much of anything for them except validating that the student had the credential they had.
Right.
Even then, I remember being in an airport one night and seeing somebody doing interviews with someone on a cell phone, and had all these papers scattered around him, and they were unofficial transcripts from students. And I thought, don't you know, buddy, that's worthless, So, but of course, they mean a lot to us inside the academy. Amelia, I want to come back to you because you raised this really interesting point in there about the recognition that learning is happening outside the classroom. And I've said this a few times as we've been doing this work. If I went back 10 years and certainly 20 years, that conversation would be very different with faculty. I think that a lot of faculty have not only sponsored that kind of out of the classroom learning, but are very much accepting of it. But when we think about partnering with that between student affairs and academic affairs, the assessment of learning comes up. And you've spoken at great length about assessment outside the classroom. So share a little bit about where we're at with assessment outside the classroom and maybe where it needs to go in the future.
Yeah, so I think in some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I feel pretty confident that on some campuses, I don't want to call it the divide, but maybe the relationship between student affairs and academic affairs is still a work in progress. I remember very vividly a point when someone at a NASPA conference pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, Amelia, this is a really great presentation. I think, Tom, you were probably there too." And they said, just as long as we're clear, though, that learning happens in the classroom and engagement happens outside the classroom, then we'll probably move just fine. And I would be glad to work with student affairs and have them put some of those engagement things there. And I'm sure there's some learning that happens. And so, like you said, it twists the knife a little bit when they said that they don't look at it. That kind of just had a little bit of a slow burn. I was like, "Whew," you had to respond in real time. So there will probably still be those conversations about how far can you actually validate learning that you don't have dedicated structures that you would expect in the classroom to map to. But I do think we are farther along, because of, I think, accrediting bodies now saying, where are the places where students are learning everywhere? So some of that conversation is going to get a natural groundswell because others are actually starting to assert this. But if I'm being honest, I think that the starting point for learning outcomes, I actually don't have a problem if it starts in many instances with the faculty, but in partnership with student affairs, so that maybe the student, being the recipient of both sides, can see a consistency between the two. So I hopefully have not given the impression that student affairs should go off on its own and create completely separate learning outcomes that don't match. I know that's not what you're thinking, but I think there are some that probably will say if they don't win that relationship struggle, they will do that. In which case, it could be a little bit confusing. I think in the future there will still be a need to, at some point though, determine what the measurements of learning are going to be. So all of the things Dr. Baker said, regardless of who starts the conversation and who makes the decision, there's got to be some consistent framework or some approach used to actually assess the learning, because if not, then it ends up being just another checkbox to say we think you did this or that. The future of all this, and a really great example that I think I would highlight, and kudos to Indiana State if they're still on the call, is student employment or any type of on-campus employment, because that's something you actually can connect to tangible skill sets and competencies that could probably end up on the record that would be validated in some regard. So, and those on-campus experiences don't have to be limited to outside the classroom. You can work with a faculty member. I could see some undergraduate research and things like that. So there are natural synergies and connections that would work, but I think we've made progress, Tom. I'm hopeful that relationship is improving, but if I'm being honest, we got some ways to go. But I'm optimistic that we'll get farther along than we were.
No, it's great, and I think it speaks to that issue of trust, because we've made the point, well, others have made the point, not we, but saying that we don't go out to the biology professor and demand to see all the quizzes and tests to make sure the B that was presented by the faculty is actually a B, right? We trust that there's a governance process and a rigor and a consistency that provides us a grade that we can represent on a transcript, and that we need to have just as much trust in that when that assessment comes in from outside of that structure. And oftentimes those are assessments coming in the co-curriculum. But I think the more we see internships, research, study abroad, things that are being offered by faculty outside of the traditional classroom, I think the partnership just continues to grow. Yeah. So I want to take up one more topic, and that is, what do we need to pay attention to as we move into the future here? And Phil, I want to throw this one to you first. What are the things that we need to pay attention to moving forward on these issues? Phil, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Right.
One of the first is one that's been around for a while, and I think I mentioned it briefly in a prior panel, but Right now, the issue of trust around these kinds of records is being addressed through some sort of proofing mechanism that allows you to cryptographically assert that the Indiana transcript was actually issued by Indiana and not someone else. And the part that's been missing in all of that part's been relatively easier to do. But the part that's been missing is that it doesn't necessarily prove that Phil Long, that's mentioned in that transcript, is actually the person presenting that transcript. And I say it that way because we are moving towards this model of enabling individual learners to have control over their own credentials and send them. And the premise of that is that the institution is able to believe that when they hand the transcript over to an individual, it doesn't have to have that stamp that says unofficial on it, because it can't be edited, modified, or changed without indication of such visible to the individual or company that it's being given to. In the past, that wasn't just technically possible. And this is a major transition and major change, that where we now can give something to somebody else with absolute certainty that they can't modify it in any way to plagiarize or embellish or otherwise make that transcript other than the one that institution issued. And if they try, it'll be discernible. The same is true with identity, though, of the person presenting it. And we haven't solved that one yet. That's really in the future looking ahead, we need to make those two things come together. So the same trust that Indiana or North Texas is the issuer of this particular certificate or transcript, and Jane Smith is the person that's presenting it, is that person that's referred to in that transcript, that needs to be asserted and proofed as well. And that's where we are right now with the evolution of DIDs, distributed identifiers, digital identifiers, and a rapid evolution in that space, which will allow us to be able to pull these two sides of the problem together. And I think the last thing I'll mention is that all of this is dependent on the interest in and the adoption of by employers or the consumers of these transcripts into their utilization and the value proposition that they acquire from it. Because if it doesn't help them save money, do a better job at the matching process, improve retention as a consequence, then it's not helping.
Great, wonderful, yeah. Amelia, how about you? What would you mention as the areas to pay attention to for the future?
You know, I would say two. The first is probably a question that we got a lot very in the early stages of this, which was, are you all trying to assert there would now be one record that has all things classroom, all things outside the classroom, and the two don't need to be separate anymore? To which time we said, hey, I know that's a big shock to the system. That's not what we're saying right now. But I think that question is going to come back. I think as the conversations around blockchain and people being able to have portable records of some type that go in and out of their educational experience and maybe into the workforce, we might come back to that conversation about what a comprehensive learner record looks like across all the different places where students might be picking up skills and competencies. So that's the first one. The second is, I think, this influence from outside companies. And so I'm happy that we had a good number of companies that are connected to this work here doing a showcase, but I think there'll be even more. Those who, once this groundswell continues on, will say, we can provide something to you at a low cost. And so I think that will help with continued adoption of these records. So those are the two top of mind for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Mike, how about you?
Well, I'd mentioned a challenge we identified in the very first phase of this project was the data integration on campuses. In fact, it was such an issue that in the second phase, we particularly focused on it and put a group together. You know, our student information systems were designed to be enterprise systems, but of course we found shortcomings and we ended up bolting on lots of products as individual solutions that don't necessarily speak to each other. I sort of call it the Mr. Potato Head problem, where you can, attach things. And so when you do that, you end up with something that looks like this, when in fact, it's designed to look like this. So I would just encourage us to continue working on the data integration challenge. The student affairs folks may have something in an e-portfolio. There's stuff in the LMS. The department chair has something on a spreadsheet. You got something in the catalog. So that's one where our corporate partners can really step in, because you're not going to just solve this by pulling out resources on your own campus. Not everybody is resourced like that. So I encourage innovation in that regard.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank all our panelists, Mike Riley, Dr. Amelia Parnell, Phil Long. Thank you so much for being on the panel today. What a great way to our last panel to wrap this up. And I'm just going to close with some a little bit of housekeeping, but also a few things about where this might be going. Because as we feel we're pivoting in a way from the work we've been able to do through Lumina Foundation, we want to continue the work and make sure that people have appropriate places to take this as well. So first off, I wanted to mention the T3 Innovation Network that Phil is here representing today. If you're interested in being in a pilot project, make sure and look at that and find out how your CLR project can become linked to something like a pilot employer or a pilot agency or military branch. But also there's a lot more going on in this project with T3 trying to connect to the world of business. And so I put a couple links in the slide there. Also wanted to shout out to APHIS, who, as we began to wrap things up here, came forward and offered to offer a space for people who would like to connect and get together and continue to talk about CLR or enter into the conversation on CLR through their APHIS Academy. They're starting a CLR incubator group. And so it'll be a place to learn, teach, collaborate, and innovate on key initiatives and continue this work moving forward. So thank you so much for Mustafa, Suzanne, Natasha for helping to generate that. Just a quick reminder to anyone who presented today, it's been in the chat, but we really do want to be able to collect all of your slides or examples that you used in the showcases, because many of the people who are here are interested in being able to review those or share them or show examples of them to colleagues. So please make sure and send those to Amelia and me. It would be very unfortunate if we ended this without many, many thanks to all the people who have been helping us here, not the least of which are in Acro Consulting, Nicole and Michelle, who have been so instrumental in making sure that this thing operated for 5 years and was organized and together. Also, to our thanks to Melanie, Quintina, and Faduma and Acro Communications for putting up the website, for getting this event put together. You did amazing work, and I now am a Slack expert as a result of your initiatives. Thank you so much. To Mike and Summer, who helped us all navigate this big Zoom meeting for the last couple of days, and all the work that you did to get ready for this as well. We really appreciate it. And also to our IT staff, Greg, Charles, and Matt, for helping to support the backbone of all this IT infrastructure we needed for the meeting. And not the least of which, our fearless leader, Mike Riley. Thank you so much for all of your support of this work. It's been absolutely invaluable. My partners in crime, Amelia, Natasha, Giannina, thank you so much. This has been a real honor and treat to work with you. And also all of our consultants who helped us do this work and reached out to all the institutions to work with them directly. Big debt of gratitude to you, and a huge debt, right, to Lumina for all their support, financial and otherwise, and Dr. Amber Garrison Duncan, who has just been such a great partner in this work. All the solution providers who came together to support us and help us and joined our meeting. We really appreciate that. We could not do this work without your assistance, your technology, and your know-how. Thank you very much. And to all the practitioners, the hundreds of individuals who have been doing this work over the last 5 years, an enormous thank you and shout out to all of you. So thank you so much. This has been fun. Hope you enjoyed your experience in doing the showcase over the last couple of days. And certainly if you have any needs or questions in the future, Acro's not going anywhere. So please contact us. The same page you use to register for this event is the page that we have dedicated to the CLR project as one of our signature initiatives, and will continue to pursue the work going forward. So thanks to everyone. I hope you had a great time with the meeting, and we hope to see you soon in another venue on record somewhere in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.